Chapter 1051. Greetings, Mr. Qingyun. Although these old scholars were very dignified outside, they still unconsciously lowered their heads in front of Mr. Qingyun. Although Mr. Qingyun looked like an amiable old immortal with his white beard and white hair, these people were all old. Naturally, they knew more about Mr. Qingyun than the average young man. Some of them were even Mr. Qingyun's disciples. Mr. Qingyun smiled and said, "Don't be so polite. You're all busy people. How can you have time to come to my mountain?" They didn't dare. They respected and admired Mr. Qingyun in front of them, but at the same time, there was a trace of envy in their hearts. If there was anyone with the best fortune in the world, Mr. Qingyun could be counted as one of them. Not to mention that his children and grandchildren were all successful. Young Master Qingchen was famous in the world when he was young. The fourth son of the Su family was a governor before he reached the age of 25. Even the third son of the Su family, who gave up literature and joined the army, had made outstanding contributions in the Mahist army. More importantly, he had a granddaughter who became Princess Ding. With these, the Su family could easily prosper for another 100 years. Mr. Qingyun was naturally very free. He didn't have to be so careful and calculate for the prosperity of the family like them. Mr. Qingyun ordered the servant to serve tea. Everyone sat down on the stone bench in the bamboo forest and drank tea. They were silent for a while. After drinking tea for a while, seeing Mr. Qingyun sitting leisurely without any change in his expression, someone finally couldn't sit still. "Mr. Qingyun, we came to disturb you today because we have something to ask of you." One of them stood up and smiled respectfully. Mr. Qingyun raised his eyes and looked at the person who spoke. His old eyes were unexpectedly calm and clear. He smiled faintly and said, "You are Zhao Zhifeng? You studied in Lishan Academy? Speaking of which, we haven't seen each other for more than 20 years, right?" The man who spoke was almost 60 years old. Hearing Mr. Qingyun's words, he quickly smiled and said, "Mr. Qingyun is right. I was taught by Mr. Qingyun." Master Qingyun had also become famous at a young age. Although he was less than 20 years older than him when he was studying at Lishan Academy, Master Qingyun was already a great scholar. Although he wasn't Master Qingyun's inner disciple according to the rules, he still had to act as Master Qingyun's disciple. However, this made Zhao Zhifeng, who had thought highly of himself for most of his life, feel a little embarrassed. Mr. Qingyun did not mind. He smiled and said, "What do you want to say?" Zhao Zhifeng hurriedly said, "Now that His Highness Prince Ding has pacified the world, it is time for him to ascend the throne and proclaim himself as the emperor to pacify the people. Appointing an empress, taking in a concubine, re-establishing the imperial court, ordering all matters to return to their proper positions, and all officials to their proper duties so as to calm the hearts of the common people. But yesterday we sent a memorial to His Highness Prince Ding. Prince Ding was furious and resolutely refused to take a concubine. We are thinking if Mr. Qingyun should persuade Princess Ding. This Princess Ding has done great service to the Prince Ding mansion. When His Highness Prince Ding ascends the throne, the Wang Fei will naturally be the empress. But if the Wang Fei is determined to monopolize His Highness Prince Ding, I'm afraid this will damage the reputation of the Wang Fei and the Su family." Mr. Qingyun thought for a moment and then raised his head to ask with a smile, "Is this what all of you think?" Everyone looked at each other and said in unison, "Mr. Qingyun, please put the world first. The Su family is the role model of all scholars in the world. They will handle this matter appropriately." Mr. Qingyun looked at the people in front of him and shook his head regretfully. These people were not young anymore. Some of them were only a few years younger than him. Were they so obsessed with fame that they were blinded by it? Everyone has been in Glass City for a long time. What do you think of the governance of the Northwest? Mr. Qingyun asked leisurely. This Prince Ding is truly a wise ruler. The people of the Northwest live and work in peace. It is truly a prosperous era. Mr. Qingyun shook his head and said with a smile, "It is a bit exaggerated to say that it is a prosperous era. But it is true that people live and work in peace. In these 10 years, Prince Ding has not declared himself emperor. The people of the Northwest live and work in peace. It can be seen that, whether he is emperor or not is not directly related to the stability of the world. But if Prince Ding does not declare himself emperor, it is not legitimate." Someone said anxiously. Mr. Qingyun said with a smile, "It is true that a country cannot do without a ruler. Prince Ding has the heart to conquer the world. He will not leave the world without a ruler. Now that Prince Ding is not willing to declare himself emperor, it is naturally not time yet. Why are you all so anxious? Everyone looked at Mr. Qingyun with faint disappointment in their eyes. They originally thought that the Su family was willing to let Prince Ding ascend the throne as soon as possible. After all, after Prince Ding ascended the throne, the biggest contributor would definitely be the Su family. As long as Prince Ding ascended the throne, things would naturally be easy to handle in the future. But they did not expect that Mr. Qingyun really did not care. One of them stood up and said, "Mr. Qingyun is right. We should not say much about when Prince Ding will become emperor. But Prince Ding and Princess Consort have been married for more than 10 years. There is only Princess Consort in the backyard. It is not proper. Women value virtue." Wang Fei's behavior was a little too overbearing. How can she be the mother of the world in the future? Hearing this, Mr. Qingyun's eyes darkened. Just as he was about to speak, a clear voice came from outside the bamboo forest. "This old mister is wrong. The Dechu state's marriage system has a saying, 'Wives are equal. Wives are equal to their husbands.' Prince Ding is a genius unparalleled in the world. Other than the extremely intelligent Princess Ding, who dares to say that they are equal to Prince Ding? Who dares to say that they are worthy of the title of Princess Ding?" A youth wearing blue robes walked into the bamboo forest. He scanned the people seated and continued, "Also there is an ancient custom. The wife is the only mistress of the family. If she has been married for 20 years and has no children, then she can take concubines. Even if the wife has no children, the children of the concubines belong to the wife. Princess Ding married for 3 years and gave birth to a little Shitzi. Last year she gave birth to a pair of twins. What is wrong with Prince Ding not taking any concubines? Since everyone is talking about the custom, why don't this one write to His Highness Prince Ding and restore the ancient custom? But if that's the case, the concubines in your families." Su Qingyan smiled at the crowd but didn't say anything. "You are twisting words and forcing logic." Everyone was so angry that their faces turned red. A few of the older ones pointed at Su Qingyan with trembling fingers. The ancient custom that Su Qingyan spoke of was from the ancient times. At that time the customs were just established and the people were simple. From the emperor to the lowly peddlers, there was no such thing as taking concubines. Therefore the marriage system stipulated that if a woman married for 20 years and had no children, she could marry again. Even if a woman married again gave birth to children, she could not be superior to a woman who married for the first time. Later the people's hearts gradually changed. It was stipulated that those who violated the marriage system and married again would be beaten 100 times and sentenced to 1 year in prison. However, later on, the morals of the world deteriorated day by day and imperial power gradually flourished. These customs were gradually distorted by the rules, and became the common practice of having 3 wives and 4 concubines. Until now, perhaps only a family like the Su family still maintained the rule that a man could only take concubines after 40 if he had no children. If the ancient custom was forcefully restored, it would be a light punishment for the people in front of him to lose all their wives and concubines. Just the punishment of being beaten and sentenced would be enough to make them hover between life and death, and then lock them up until their bones turned to ash. Chapter 1052. Su Qingyan snorted in disdain. He walked in front of Master Qingyun and bowed respectfully. "Grandson greets grandfather." Seeing his youngest grandson, Master Qingyun was very happy. He smiled and said, "Young, arise. When did you come back? Have you seen your father and mother?" Su Qingyan grinned and said, "Grandson just came back. I passed by the foot of the mountain and came to visit grandfather. I thought grandfather was playing chess with teacher Su. I didn't expect it to be so lively." Master Qingyun smiled and said, "Someone came to visit grandfather. You should go and meet them. These few are all famous scholars and old ministers of Great Chu." Su Qingyan gave them a sideways glance, then raised his voice and said, "Oh? So they are famous scholars in Dechu State." Su Qingyan emphasized the words "sons of Dechu State," which made the old men uncomfortable. Although Dechu State had moved south, it was not destroyed yet. If they rushed to join the Prince Ding mansion, it would be seen as disloyal to outsiders. Regardless of whether Su Qingyan had this intention or not, at least in the ears of these old men, this was what he meant. Even the young master of the Su family couldn't tolerate being bullied by a brat who was still wet behind the ears. One of them sneered and said, "I heard that fifth young master Su has a high position at such a young age. Master Qingyun is very lucky." Su Qingyan did not seem to understand the other party's meaning. He smiled and said, "You don't have to envy grandfather. I came back this time to ask the prince and princess consort for help. I heard that the young masters in your family are all outstanding. Why don't you come with me to the north and work for the Prince Ding mansion? I am still young and can be your son's assistant." The old man's face stiffened. If he had bullied Su Qingbai, he might have had something to say. However, it was a mistake to bully Su Qingyan. Everyone knew that the fifth young master of the Su family followed fourth young master Su to the north and led a group of commoners to farm. Now that fourth young master Su went to Xiling, fifth young master Su remained in the north. These self-proclaimed scholars were incomparably noble. How could they be willing to let their children and grandchildren mingle with a group of vulgar commoners? They would only complain that the Prince Ding mansion didn't give their children enough official positions. Fifth young master Su was definitely the most eloquent of all the young masters of the Su family. He had inherited the teachings of second master Su when he was young. But his sharp tongue was not because he was eloquent, but because his words were vicious and merciless. Not long after, a group of old pedants over the age of 50 hurriedly left with ashen faces. Watching the group of people leave, Su Qingyan snorted disdainfully. These people really have nothing better to do. What does Prince Ding taking a concubine have to do with them? Su Zhe, who was sitting next to him, shook his head and said with a smile, "Fifth young master is a smart person, how could he not know? How is this just a matter of taking a concubine? More importantly, once Prince Ding ascended the throne and married a concubine, these people would become relatives of the emperor. If they gave birth to a son or a daughter, they would naturally be noble beyond words. They really aren't afraid of death." Su Qingyan muttered in a low voice. With Prince Ding's sinister personality, would he really allow himself to be manipulated by these old pedants who thought themselves infallible? Birds die in pursuit of food and men die in pursuit of wealth. It has been like this since ancient times. Su Zhe said with a smile. As expected, before the old men who went to visit Mr. Qingyun could sit down in the city, they heard Prince Ding's decree from the Prince Ding mansion. Prince Ding ordered young Master Qingchen to be the right prime minister, and Zhang Qilan, Lu Jingxian, Yuan Pei and Leng Huai to be the great generals. It wasn't strange that all the generals under the command of the Mahist army would be rewarded. More importantly, all the important positions of the third rank and above were occupied by young people under the age of 40. For example, Feng Zhiyao, Leng Haoyu and Han Mingxi were all in high positions without exception. Even Princess Ding's shadow guard, Qin Feng, was given the title of Commander Qi Lin of the Mahist army. At the same time, he was given the title of General Ming Lai. He was on the same level as Murong Shen and the other generals who led hundreds of thousands of troops. Zhuojing, Lin Han and Wei Lin were also given official positions. They were placed in the Ministry of Revenue, Ministry of Justice and Ministry of Appointments. As for He Su, who had outstanding military achievements, he was naturally given the title of Great General. Prince Ding's sudden move made countless people dumbfounded. Most of those so-called highly respected and aged elders of famous clans only had a high and mighty title. However, in the face of Prince Ding's punishment, everyone was speechless. Because the two members of the Su family, Su Hongyu and Su Hongyan, also had empty titles like them. The Su family had worked hard for the Prince Ding mansion these years. This time, Prince Ding and Princess Ding were out on an expedition at the same time and such a big thing happened. If it weren't for the Su family, how could the Northwest not be in chaos? Since they didn't express their dissatisfaction, these raised idlers didn't have the face to say that they were dissatisfied. But Prince Ding's attitude made all the aristocratic families anxious. The people Prince Ding put in important positions were all old and trusted subordinates of the Prince Ding mansion and the Mahist army. He was even willing to use the princess consort's guards instead of using them, the descendants of the prestigious families. This was obviously a warning from Prince Ding. What's more, in the past few years, the Northwest's imperial examination system had gradually matured. These aristocratic families' chances of directly entering the imperial court were greatly reduced. No matter what aristocratic family they were, if no one spoke in the imperial court, they would only end up in decline. How could they not be better? Everyone had yet to regain their senses when the orders from Prince Ding's residence came one after another, causing these old men to feel dizzy and disoriented. The first to bear the brunt was a strange edict issued by Prince Ding. That was from now on, except for the Di-Fei's family, the families of concubines were not allowed to become officials in the imperial court for 3 generations. This edict was permanent and could not be disobeyed. As soon as this order was issued, the patriarchs of the aristocratic families who wanted to send their daughters into the Prince Ding mansion immediately vomited blood. Not allowed to become officials for 3 generations. What did this mean? This meant that your enemies would drag you into the mud and never be able to rise again. More importantly, this decree was still in effect. In other words, from now on, those who wanted to rely on nepotism to rise up the ranks could give up on the idea. If this news was only a warning to them, then the last order was clearly telling them that Prince Ding's intentions could not be disobeyed. The last order was that from now on, the Prince Ding mansion would no longer continue the aristocratic preferential treatment system of the Dechu state. All officials had to pass the imperial examination or be personally examined by Prince Ding's princess. Most importantly, the scholars who participated in the imperial examination had to serve at least 1 year of military service. The aristocratic families who had previously disapproved of the Northwest's so-called compulsory military service system were instantly shocked. Not only would their disciples not be able to become officials in the imperial court, they would not even have the right to participate in the imperial examination through the normal channels. In a short time, the number of people who came to the Su Fu increased. Inside the Prince Ding mansion, Su Hongyu, Su Qingchen, and the others were all present. Emo Shuyao pulled Yi Li to sit at the head of the table and lazily looked at the crowd. He was clearly in a good mood. 2 days ago he had been angered by those old scholars, but he could not casually kill them. However, that was fine. If Emo Shuyao wanted to punish someone, he had plenty of ways to make them wish they were dead. Therefore Prince Ding did not care that the bombs he had dropped had blown up the aristocratic families of the world. He only sat in the Wang Fu and pulled Yi Li along to watch the show, laughing to himself. Chapter 1053. Su Hongyu looked at him and shook his head. Prince, do you really intend to exterminate all these aristocratic families? Sometimes these arrogant aristocratic families were very annoying, but sometimes they couldn't be left out. Moreover, if they were pushed too far, these people might all defect to Jiangnan. When that happened, it would not be good for the Prince Ding mansion's reputation. Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows. Since they claim to be loyal to Ai, they have to follow Ai's rules. Could it be that they want this prince to accommodate them? As long as they know their limits, I will naturally give them a way out. As for those who are originally wavering, I do not care. These 2 days I have caused a lot of trouble for Mr. Hongyu. Mr. Qingyun was far away in the Lishan Academy, and it was not easy to see him. However, Su Hongyu was in Glass City. As the current head of the Su family, he was naturally the first person that the other family heads wanted to win over. Su Hongyu shook his head, indicating that he did not need to care. Su Qingchen was now the right chief minister, second only to one person. Su Qingbai was also a high official of a region. Su Qingze and Su Qingfeng also held important positions. The Su family was already in the limelight, and the older generation naturally did not need to be entangled in these matters. They only needed to pave the way for the younger generation. Su Qingchen raised his eyebrows and looked at Emo Shuyao, asking, Prince has left the position of left chief minister. Who is he planning to use it to bait? Emo Shuyao raised his eyebrows and smiled. With a sincere expression he said, I am not baiting anyone. The position of left chief minister has already been chosen. It is just that the person will not take the position. Mr. Xiaoding? Su Qingchen asked. Regardless of status, ability, or reputation, Mr. Xiaoding was no doubt a suitable candidate. The fact that he used to be from West Hill might be criticized, but it would undoubtedly make it easier for him to win over the hearts of the people of West Hill. After all, 1/3 of the Prince Ding mansion's territory was seized from West Hill. Having a famous scholar from West Hill as the prime minister would have a great effect on the people's loyalty. Mr. Xiaoding agreed? Su Qingchen asked. But others don't know yet. Others might not know, but there would be many people eyeing the position of left prime minister covetously. Su Qingchen would never believe that Emo Shuyao did not intend to make a fuss about this. Emo Shuyao smiled and said, Of course I agree. However, Mr. Xiaoding is busy with the affairs in the northwest. It will take at least 2 to 3 months before he can come to Glass City to take up his post. As for what happens during this period, it's none of I's business. Everyone present couldn't help but twitch their lips. Anyone who wanted to play tricks under Prince Ding's nose must have forgotten to burn incense in their previous life. Seeing everyone's expressions, Emo Shuyao didn't mind at all. He waved his hand and said, "Let's not worry about these trivial matters for now. After this they should be quiet for a few days. Let's talk about Lin and Exener's first birthday banquet first." Everyone's expressions became serious. Su Qingze said calmly, "The invitations have been sent out. The northern tribes, Dechu State, West Hill, Nanzhao, and the kingdoms of the western region have all been invited. The post house is also preparing for it. The envoys of the northern tribes were in Glass City now. As for the rest, he should be here in half a month. However, when the time comes, Glass City's safety." Su Qingze frowned. Although the world situation had been settled, it was because of this that it was more dangerous. Whether it was the northern tribes, West Hill, or Dechu State, there were many people who wanted Emo Shuyao's life in the dark. Emo Shuyao thought for a while and said, "When the time comes, I will deploy troops to guard the vicinity of Glass City. Qingfeng's subordinate Qi Lin can also be stationed in Glass City temporarily in case of emergency." Yi Li nodded in agreement. Emo Shuyao asked curiously, "Who will come from West Hill?" Su Qingchen said leisurely, "If I'm not wrong, it should be Lei Tingfeng." Lei Tingfeng? Emo Shuyao frowned. He did not take Lei Tingfeng seriously. However, if Lei Tingfeng came personally, it meant that the situation in West Hill was still stable. Su Qingchen nodded and said, "I'm sorry to disappoint you. Lei Tingfeng and the Emperor of Xiling did not fight. Once the news of Lei Zhenting's death spread, the Emperor of Xiling ordered Lei Tingfeng to succeed the position of Genom of Gojoseon. The Emperor of Xiling does not have a son. If everything goes well, Lei Tingfeng will be the next Emperor of West Hill." Whether it was the Emperor of Xiling or Lei Tingfeng, they were not as stupid as they thought. Therefore, their hopes of benefiting from the conflict would be dashed. Emo Shuyao did not mind. He waved his hand and smiled, "It's fine. If Lei Tingfeng is finished so quickly, I will be disappointed. Lei Zhenting's death should allow him to grow. This time I want to see how far he can grow." Su Qingchen nodded and said, "Lei Tingfeng should be here to negotiate with the Prince Ding mansion." Emo Shuyao lowered his eyebrows and thought for a while. He said, "Let Murong Shen and Marquis Nan continue to fight. If they don't fight to the original border between West Hill and the Dechu State, there is no need to negotiate." Su Qingchen pondered for a moment and said, "If Lei Tingfeng wants to settle down and recuperate, he may take the initiative to retreat. That's the best." Emo Shuyao smiled and said, "No matter how he wants to negotiate, the Xiling army must retreat to the original border with the Dechu State." Su Qingchen nodded and agreed with Emo Shuyao's point of view. He frowned and said, "The envoy of the northern tribes wants to talk to you or Li personally." Emo Shuyao looked at Yi Li blankly and asked, "Who is the envoy of the northern tribes?" Master Qingchen was speechless. Emo Shuyao had been back for almost half a month. How could he not know who the envoy of the northern tribes was? Even if the northern tribes and the Mahist army had just fought a war, the envoy of the northern tribes was still a country's envoy. As Prince Ding, even if he wanted to pretend, he had to pretend to be a gentleman. Yalu Hong. Chapter 1054. In the end, Emo Shuyao did not summon the envoy from the northern tribes and threw the matter to Yi Li. It had to be said that Emo Shuyao was sometimes so headstrong that it gave people a headache. On this side, the elders of the prestigious families were discussing the matter of the princess consort interfering in politics. On the other side, he openly handed the matter of negotiating with the northern tribes over to the princess consort to handle. This was equivalent to slapping the faces of these old men who thought that they could interfere with Prince Ding's actions without any hesitation. However, the elders who had just been slapped mercilessly by Prince Ding did not dare to say anything before they came up with a countermeasure. They could only pretend that they did not see anything and hide in their homes to sulk. Greetings to Princess Ding. In the northern tribes inn, Yelu Hong greeted Yi Li calmly. He was not angry because Emo Shuyao did not receive him personally. Not to mention Princess Ding's position in the Mahist army, Just the fact that the northern tribes were the defeated party meant that they did not have the right to raise any objections. Northern tribe's crown prince greets you. Yili could not help but sigh at Yelu Hong's good temperament. Even at this stage he could still be so polite. Of course, at the same time, she also had to sigh at the influence of political power on people's hearts. Even the northern tribes people who were known to be the most upright and outspoken had learned to beat around the bush. Yili sat down and did not beat around the bush with Yelu Hong. She asked, "Did Princess Ronghua come with the crown prince?" Yelu Hong did not expect Yili's first question to be about Princess Ronghua. He paused for a moment before nodding. "To be honest, Ronghua did come with me to Li City." Yili raised her eyebrows and smiled. The king of the northern tribes really trusts the crown prince. The king of the northern tribes used Princess Ronghua as a bargaining chip in the negotiations with the Mahist army. But before the negotiations could take place, he asked Yelu Hong to bring her back. It was hard to tell if the king of the northern tribes truly wanted to take back the ashes of Yelu Yi and the soldiers of the northern tribes or if he was just joking. Yelu Hong smiled bitterly. "This one has made a military order with father, that I must bring back the remains of seventh brother and the northern tribe soldiers. Please grant my wish, princess consort. As for Ronghua, please take care of him." Yili took a deep look at Yelu Hong and said, "The crown prince has deep feelings for Princess Ronghua. I have not let the princess down after all these years in the northern tribes." Yelu Hong sighed softly. "This one is incompetent. This one has made a fool of himself in front of princess. I will ask Ronghua to come out and meet the princess." Yelu Hong turned around and ordered the attendant beside him. After a while, Princess Ronghua came out from the back hall. Princess Ronghua, who had changed into the clothes of the Central Plains, looked a little haggard and pale. Compared with the last time they met, she was less beautiful and more weak and haggard. "Your Highness," Princess Ronghua bowed and said softly. Yili raised her hand to support her and said with a smile, "Princess, you don't have to be so courteous. Please sit down." The three people sat down again. Yili looked at Yelu Hong and said, "The prince has handed over the negotiations with the northern tribes to me. I presume that a few days ago, young Master Qingshan has already mentioned the conditions of my Prince Ding mansion to the Crown Prince? What does Crown Prince Yelu think?" Yelu Hong frowned. "The war horses are the foundation of the northern tribes. The Prince Ding mansion wants 10,000 war horses at once. Forgive I for being blunt, but it is really difficult. With my power, I am afraid I can't agree." The negotiation was not something that could be done overnight. Yili did not care and said with a smile, "Crown Prince Yelu does not need to rush to answer me. Anyway, the Crown Prince will stay in Li City for a while. It is better for the Crown Prince to think about it and discuss it with the king of the northern tribes. What does the Crown Prince think?" Yelu Hong nodded and said with a smile, "Thank you, Your Highness, for your understanding. Regardless of whether this matter is successful or not, Princess Ronghua will return to the Dechu state. Please take care of her. This is the sincerity of the northern tribes." Princess Ronghua's expression was indifferent. She lowered her eyes and sat quietly. It was as if Yelu Hong and Yili were not talking about her. Yili glanced at Princess Ronghua and sighed softly. "If the princess stays in Li City, the Prince Ding mansion will naturally treat you as a princess. If the princess misses her family, I can also send someone to send the princess to Jiangnan. With Princess Ronghua's status as a princess, no one would dare to treat her badly whether she stayed in Li City or went to Nanjing." Princess Ronghua smiled faintly and said with a wry smile, "Jiang, where is my family? Ronghua wants to go back to Chongqing to serve Aunt Xiaoyang. Please grant my wish, Your Highness." When the imperial court of the Dechu state moved south, Princess Xiaoran also went south, but Xiaoyang princess stayed in the Chu capital. After that, the Mahist army took back the Chu capital and renamed it Chongqing. Great elder Princess Fuxi died of illness, and Xiaoyang princess had been staying in Chongqing to observe mourning for great elder princess. Princess Xiaoran died of illness soon after going south. Now Xiaoyang princess was the closest relative of Princess Ronghua. Yili nodded and said, "Well, in a few days Xiaoyang princess will also come to Li City. At that time the princess can return to Chongqing with Xiaoyang princess." Princess Ronghua nodded gratefully and said, "Thank you, Your Highness." After that, she lowered her head and no longer looked at Yelu Hong. Yelu Hong glanced at Princess Ronghua. His expression changed slightly, but he did not say anything. They had been husband and wife for 10 years. How could there be no feelings at all? What was more, Princess Ronghua was an extremely beautiful and intelligent woman, completely different from the ordinary women of the northern tribes. But no matter what, Princess Ronghua was definitely not as important as the throne of the northern tribes. After today's departure, they might never see each other again. When Yi Li left the northern tribe's embassy, she brought Princess Ronghua back. Since Yelu Hong had already brought Princess Ronghua to Li City, no matter whether the negotiation was successful or not, he naturally did not think that he could bring her back. In this case, it did not matter when Princess Ronghua would be returned to the Prince Ding mansion. He simply generously let Yi Li take her away directly. After returning to the Prince Ding mansion and settling Princess Ronghua down, Yi Li looked at Princess Ronghua's gloomy look and just sighed secretly. She did not try to comfort her. In the future, regardless of the relationship between the Prince Ding mansion and the Dechu state and the northern tribes, Princess Ronghua was destined not to return to the northern tribes. Princess Ronghua was also a smart person. Naturally, she understood that the current situation was very good for her. Yelu Hong treated her with some affection. At this moment, she was probably still worried about her children in the northern tribes. But whether it was the Prince Ding mansion or the Dechu state far away in Jiangnan, they could not and had no obligation to bring back the children for her. Today, the people of the Central Plains hated the northern tribes more than the northern tribes hated the people of the Central Plains. Even if the children really returned to the Dechu state, it would not be a good thing. After a few days of negotiation with Yelu Hong, who had insisted on not giving in, finally relented and agreed to exchange 10,000 northern tribes' warhorses for the remains of Yelu Yi and the soldiers who died in the Dechu state. For this result, Yi Li was not surprised. This time, the northern tribes were defeated by the Mahist army. It could be said that the national strength of the northern tribes was greatly reduced. The northern tribes were sparsely populated and barren. If they wanted to return to their heyday, it would take at least a decade or two. And this was assuming that the Mahist army would not take the initiative to attack and give them a chance to rest. 10,000 warhorses in exchange for a temporary peace and a chance to breathe. It may not be a good thing for the northern tribes in the long run, but now the northern tribes had no other choice. Chapter 1055. When the two sides signed the peace agreement, Mo Shuyao finally showed up personally. However, Yi Li and Su Qingchen's names were still signed on the document. Su Qingchen was now the right prime minister and naturally had the right to represent Prince Ding in signing the agreement. However, Yi Li's appearance as a woman made the northern tribes' emissaries feel uneasy. It wasn't that they looked down on Yi Li, but they also understood the rules and traditions of the Central Plains. In formal situations, women had no right to speak. Thus, they couldn't help but doubt the effectiveness of this peace agreement. Faced with the northern tribe's suspicions and the dissatisfied gazes of the aristocratic officials, Yi Li didn't care and simply signed her name on the agreement. After both sides signed the agreement, Mo Shuyao stood up and pulled Yi Li to Yelu Hong with a smile. "Crown Prince Yelu, since you and I have signed the agreement, I hope to see the 10,000 northern tribes' horses as soon as possible." Hearing this, Yelu Hong's mouth twitched. It was said that people of the Central Plains like to beat around the bush and make others dizzy. However, Yelu Hong found that being too direct was also unbearable. Mo Shuyao's words meant to Yelu Hong, "If it wasn't for the 10,000 horses, why would I be in the mood to sign a peace agreement with you? Prince Ding, don't worry. As long as the Mahist army abides by the agreement, within 3 months, the 10,000 horses will be sent to the Central Plains." Yelu Hong said. Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows. "I will naturally keep my word. 10,000 horses. Within 10 years, neither side will be able to start a war." Yelu Hong nodded. "In the future, the northern tribes and the Prince Ding mansion will be allies. This crown prince will toast the prince and princess." Mo Shuyao's expression was indifferent and he didn't object. That was how it was between countries. There were no eternal friends or eternal enemies. There were only eternal benefits. Although it was said that both sides were on good terms, both sides knew that neither the northern tribes nor the Prince Ding mansion had the strength to fight another battle. However, the northern tribes was in a worse state than the Prince Ding mansion. If the Prince Ding mansion tried their best, they could still fight another round. However, the losses would outweigh the gains. If the northern tribes were to continue fighting, it would be a disaster. Therefore, the northern tribes had to pay a higher price. If one day one of the two sides recovered and wanted to make a move, the the so-called peace agreement would be nothing more than a piece of paper. When the envoys from Xiling and Dechu State arrived at Glass City, the Prince Ding mansion had just signed the agreement with the northern tribes. Upon hearing this news, the expressions of the envoys from the two countries turned ugly. With the ceasefire between the Prince Ding mansion and the northern tribes, it was very likely that they would turn their attention to the south. Regardless of whether it was the Dechu State or Xiling, they would not be able to withstand the attacks of the Mahist army. Everyone had to face an ironclad fact. After so many years of open and covert struggles, the final victor was obviously Prince Ding's residence. Reporting to the prince's consort, the envoys from Dechu State and Xiling have come to visit. When they heard this news, Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li were sitting in the courtyard, playing with the two babies. The two babies had been handed over to the Su family not long after they were born. Yi Li had always felt guilty about this. Ever since they returned, whenever they had time, Yi Li would drag Mo Xiuyao to accompany the two babies. From time to time, Mo Xiaobao would also come to join in the fun. Mo Xiuyao was very fond of the little princess who was already as exquisite as a snow jade, so he followed Yi Li to play with the two babies every day. The two of them had become the most leisurely people in the bustling Glass City. Why did they come together? Yi Li raised her eyebrows and asked. Mo Xiuyao did not mind and said indifferently, the distance between the two sides is about the same. It's not a big deal to arrive together. Who came from Jiangnan? The guard reporting to the prince, it's King Yu from Dechu State who came with the new Emperor Chu. King Yu? Mo Jingyu? Mo Xiuyao did not have much of an impression of these princes from the Dechu State's royal family. When he was young he might have been familiar with them, but when he grew up, especially after the incident at the Prince Ding mansion, he did not have much interaction with these people. Therefore he did not have a deep impression of this Mo Jingyu who could be considered to have made a name for himself. Yi Li got up and placed Lin Mer, who had already fallen asleep in her hands, back onto the small bed. She said, since Xiling Genom of Gojoseon and Emperor Chu have personally come, we should go out and meet them. So as to avoid being rude. Mo Xiuyao nodded. He carefully put down the little princess and followed Yi Li out to meet the guests. In the main hall of the Prince Ding mansion, the two groups of people were divided into two sides. The new little emperor of Dechu State, Mo Suiyin, was only 12 years old this year. He sat at the forefront of the Dechu State side. Although he was wearing the luxurious dragon robe of the Ming Emperor, his expression showed that he was somewhat weak and panicked. From time to time he would look at Mo Jingyu who was sitting below him. On the other side, Lei Tingfeng was wearing the Xiling Genom of Gojoseon's court robes. He looked dignified and graceful. Compared to his previous irritation and panic, he was more composed and calm. The Xiling officials sitting below him all lowered their eyes solemnly, as if they were following Genom of Gojoseon's lead. They looked more magnanimous than the Dechu State. Prince Ding mansion has arrived. Princess consort has arrived. The voice of the palace attendant came from outside the door. Prince Ding, who was dressed in white and had white hair, walked over hand in hand with Princess consort, who was dressed in green and had black hair and a jade face. Just a glance at the crowd was enough to make them feel a heavy pressure. Lei Tingfeng looked at the beautiful couple in front of him. The expression in his eyes changed, but in an instant he restrained all his emotions. He calmly stood up and cupped his hands, saying, Prince Ding, Princess consort. I have disturbed you. Please don't blame me. Yi Li looked at Lei Tingfeng with some surprise. In just 1 or 2 months Lei Tingfeng had changed a lot. His handsome and tall figure faintly had some of Lei Jinting's magnanimity in the past. Mo Xiuyao also sized up Lei Tingfeng but quickly turned away. He waved his hand and smiled, saying, Genom of Gojoseon is too polite. Genom of Gojoseon has come from afar. Your presence brings light to the Prince Ding mansion. Genom of Gojoseon, please have a seat. No one mentioned the big battle that was fought a month ago, and no one mentioned Lei Jinting's death. Although many people in West Hill didn't look too good, they still restrained themselves. Mo Xiuyao pulled Yi Li to sit down and looked at Emperor Chu, Mo Suiyin, and Mo Jingyu on the other side. Mo Xiuyao stood up and bowed to Mo Xiuyao, saying, Suiyin pays his respects to Uncle Prince Ding. Mo Xiuyao's eyes flashed and he laughed loudly, saying, Emperor Chu is a guest from afar. There is no need to be so polite. Please have a seat. A trace of disappointment flashed across Mo Jingyu's eyes. He sighed helplessly in his heart and smiled, saying, Prince Ding is indeed the emperor's elder. It's not too much to call him uncle. Prince Ding doesn't mind. If they were really talking about the family tree and the backup, Mo Suiyun wouldn't call Mo Shuyao uncle but great uncle. However, Mo Shuyao clearly didn't have any intention of getting involved with the Dechu state's royal family. Mo Jingyu also understood that Dechu state and the Prince Ding mansion had already fallen out. As long as Mo Shuyao's brain didn't have any problems, those old pedants' whimsical ideas weren't reliable at all. Therefore, although he was disappointed, he didn't care too much. Chapter 1056. Mo Shuyao smiled but didn't say anything. With his intelligence, how could he not know what the Dechu state was planning? It could only be said that those old men in Nanjing were the same as those in Glass City. They were all as naive. Seeing Mo Jingyu's awkwardness, Yili smiled and said, Emperor Chu and Genom of Gojoseon have come from afar. It must have been a tiring journey. This consort has ordered people to prepare a guest house. I invite the two of you to rest there. This consort and the prince will hold a welcoming dinner for the two of you tonight. Lei Tingfing nodded silently. Thank you, princess. Although Lei Tingfing had calmed down a lot these days, it was still difficult for him to face the enemy who had killed his father. Looking at the leisurely Mo Shuyao and Yi Li in front of him, Lei Tingfing suddenly felt a little weak. He didn't have the mood to say anything else. Mo Jingyu glanced at the clearly tired Mo Suiyun and nodded. If that's the case, then thank you, princess. King Yu is too courteous. Yi Li smiled faintly. Soon Lei Tingfing, Mo Jingyu and the others bid farewell and left. It was their first time in Glass City, so they had come to pay their respects. Even if there was something, they would have to wait until they had rested. Seeing the group leave, Yi Li sighed softly. Lei Tingfing has changed a lot. No wonder he was able to control Shi Ling in such a short time. If a few more years pass, he will be a good opponent. Lei Tingfing had been suppressed by Lei Jinting's brilliance for too long, so much so that he had lost his edge. Without Lei Jinting, this insurmountable mountain, Lei Tingfing's growth and changes could be said to be rapid. Mo Shuyao raised his eyebrows. Even if he is an opponent, he won't be Ai's opponent. Lei Tingfing still needed a long time to truly grow. At that time, his opponent naturally wouldn't be him. Prince Ding calculated with satisfaction. He didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt for setting up a powerful opponent for his son. Yi Li looked at him helplessly and smiled faintly. What does Dechu state mean? With one arm around Yi Li, Mo Shuyao lazily said, what else could it mean? Those old fellows in Nanjing's imagination. See? Was there going to be another cycle of the Dechu state and the Mahist army entangling each other again? Yi Li stared blankly. She couldn't help but smile and shake her head. It had to be said that these old men in the imperial court who had monopolized power for their entire lives sometimes had complicated thoughts that made one dizzy. But sometimes they were so naive that it made one want to laugh. How could they think that after the Mahist army and the Dechu state had broken off relations, and after the Mahist army had paid such a heavy price, the Prince Ding mansion and the Dechu state would still have a day of reconciliation? The people of the Prince Ding mansion weren't benevolent bodhisattvas. This shouldn't be Mo Jingyu's intention, Yi Li said. Although Mo Jingyu was respectful to Mo Shuyao, he wasn't very friendly. It was clear that he didn't think highly of these people's plans. Mo Shuyao smiled. For Mo Jingyu to be able to live until now and have so much power, he naturally isn't an idiot. It's impossible that he doesn't know this. It's just that, right now, I'm afraid that he's unable to completely control the entire imperial court of the Dechu state. Mo Jingli was a little stupid, but Jiangnan was his territory. And compared to Mo Jingli, it was clear that Mo Jingli's methods were more ruthless. When Mo Jingli was around, these old men didn't dare to cause trouble. Now that the new emperor had been installed, it would be strange if they didn't take advantage of their seniority. What do you plan to do? Yi Li asked with a smile. Mo Shuyao said, I've already defeated Mo Jingli and Mo Jingqi. Mo Suiyun is Mo Xiaobao's problem. Otherwise, others might think that I've gone against the imperial family of the Dechu state. They even bullied a teenage child. Later, I'll tell Mo Xiaobao to take a look at Mo Suiyun, lest that brat has nothing better to do and keeps circling around Exa. You're saying, Mo Suiyun. Yi Li frowned, looking at Mo Shuyao in confusion. If Mo Suiyun wasn't worth mentioning, Mo Shuyao wouldn't have specially asked Mo Xiaobao to visit him. Emo Xiao chuckled softly. I think that brat might be a smart person. At least, he's smarter than his father and uncle. Yili sighed helplessly. She wasn't born in the imperial family after all. She wasn't worried about the dangers in the open, but she wasn't good at these things in the dark. At least she didn't see anything strange about Emo Suiyun from their conversation just now. Emo Xiao happily rubbed Yili's fragrant hair and smiled. That brat's acting skills aren't bad. If I hadn't met his gaze just now, I would have been fooled by him. When he looked at I, he didn't show as much fear as he did. But he's still a child after all. He probably didn't have anyone to teach him since he was young, so he still gave himself away. Yili nodded. It wasn't easy to not give herself away in front of Emo Xiao. That child was probably purposely showing a fearful expression, but he didn't know that going too far was as bad as not going far enough. Emo Xiaobao. If Emo Xiaobao can't even win against him, then he should be taught a lesson by Su Qingchen. Emo Xiao said indifferently. A Prince Ding Mansion's heir who had been carefully taught since young couldn't even win against the little emperor who had just been pushed onto the throne. If this was spread out as his father, he would feel ashamed for him. Yili looked up and saw the dissatisfaction that flashed across Emo Xiao's face. She could only nod and agree. I understand. I'll let Xiaobao receive Emperor Chu later. But if Emo Xiaobao's performance wasn't good and he was taught a lesson by his father as his mother, she could only feel sorry for him. Emo Xiao never lacked new ways to teach people a lesson. He didn't hold back when it came to teaching Emo Xiaobao a lesson. So, classmate Emo Xiaobao had to be careful. In the Prince Ding Mansion's backyard, Mo Xiaobao, who had just finished his homework and ran back to his room to visit his sister, suddenly shivered. Chapter 1057. The Prince Ding Mansion arranged for the Dechu State's post house to be located just 2 streets away from the Prince Ding Mansion. For example, Xiling, Northern Army, Southern Army, etc., all had their own embassies in Glass City. However, the Dechu State never had one. Firstly, it was because the relationship between the Dechu State and the Prince Ding Mansion was awkward. Secondly, neither Emo Jingli nor Emo Jingqi were willing to admit that the Prince Ding Mansion was an independent power. Therefore, every time the Dechu State sent an envoy, it was always arranged by the Prince Ding Mansion. However, this time, Emo Jingyu took the initiative to tell Emo Xiao that the Dechu State intended to set up an embassy in Glass City. His intention to show weakness was obvious. In the post house, Emo Suiyun shook off Emo Jingyu and the group of officials and walked into his room. His face, which was originally filled with a trace of cowardice and immaturity, immediately darkened. He walked to the side of the table and sat down, lost in thought. Before ascending the throne, Emo Suiyun never thought that he would one day become the ruler of a country. Just like his royal brother Emo Suyun, who had passed away, his mother was just an unremarkable palace maid. Compared to Emo Suyun, he was even more obviously ignored. Even his name was given by his mother. Or perhaps he was even luckier than Emo Suyun because he was not chosen by Emo Jingqi to inherit the throne at that time. All these years, as the Emperor Emo Suyun had been living in the palace, he could clearly see with his cold eyes what kind of life Emo Suyun was living. Originally, he thought that he would be an unremarkable prince and move out of the palace to live his life peacefully after he grew up. However, he never thought that one day Emo Jingli, who was out on a campaign, would suddenly be deposed. Then the Empress Dowager and all the royal relatives, civil and military officials found that he was the most suitable candidate. Following that, he became the Dechu State's emperor. Emo Jingli being deposed made him sigh in relief. Although he had only seen Emo Jingli a few times, every time he saw this Uncle Wang, he would feel a chill down his spine. He could clearly feel that Emo Jingli wanted to kill him. No, it should be said that Emo Jingli wanted to kill all the princes left behind by the previous emperor. And he didn't seem to be dead. It was only when he ascended to the throne that he realized the true suffering of his younger brother. In the eyes of the Empress Dowager and the nobles, this little emperor was just a chess piece in their game. Emo Suiyun knew that he didn't want that. He didn't want to be tied down by these people. He had heard a lot about Prince Ding and he wanted to be like him. Therefore, his respect towards Prince Ding was not fake. He really respected and admired this world-shaking prince, so when he bowed to him he couldn't help but look up at Prince Ding. However, when he met the deep and indifferent eyes of the white-clothed, white-haired handsome man, he couldn't help but feel a little flustered. Those indifferent eyes didn't seem to see him at all, but also seemed to be able to see through the most secretive thoughts in his heart. He quickly pretended to be afraid and lowered his head, but he knew that he had definitely aroused Prince Ding's suspicion. Emo Swain bit the corner of his lips and frowned. Although he was quite scheming and courageous, he was still an 11 or 12-year-old child after all. Moreover, no one had taught him seriously all these years, so when he encountered such an unexpected situation he couldn't help but panic. If Prince Ding wanted to kill him, reporting to your majesty, there is a young master outside requesting an audience. Outside the door, the guard reported in a low voice. Emo Swain was feeling vexed, so he frowned unhappily and said, "What young master? I won't see him." But the guard hesitated. Emo Swain said impatiently, "If there's anything, go find Uncle Yu. Don't bother me." Soon there was no sound outside the door. Emo Swain sneered in his heart. These people didn't even put him, the emperor, in their eyes. It was just a routine report. Although he was a little curious as to why someone would look for him in Glass City, Emo Swain wasn't in the mood to think about it. Thud thud thud. Just as Emo Swain was about to speak, a light knocking sound came from the window. Emo Swain frowned. Just as he stood up, he saw the window being opened from the outside, and a handsome man poked his head in from the window. Emo Swain frowned slightly and stared at the boy for a while before asking, "You were looking for me just now?" The boy pursed his lips and climbed up from the window. He gently landed on the ground and nodded, "That's right, why didn't you see me?" Emo Swain couldn't help but roll his eyes. "I know you." After sizing him up again, he realized that the boy was extremely handsome and seemed to be younger than him. He was wearing very ordinary clothes, but it couldn't hide the noble aura he seemed to have been born with. Emo Swain silently calculated in his heart before asking, "You are Emo Yu-chen?" Emo Xiaobao rolled his eyes and grinned as he came to Emo Swain's side to size him up. He smiled and said, "You are indeed very smart. How did you guess my identity?" Emo Swain resisted the urge to roll his eyes. In the entire Glass City, other than the little heir of the Prince Ding mansion, how many people dared to barge into the post house where the Emperor of Dechu State was staying? "What brings the little heir here?" Emo Swain assumed the posture of an emperor and asked solemnly. Emo Xiaobao blinked his eyes and looked at Emo Swain strangely. "What brings me here? Look at me. What brings me here?" He was only 10 years old, okay? Even if he wanted to do something, he had to wait until he had power. Right now, he was only a pitiful child who was brought out by his annoying Lord Father to meet his future enemy. Emo Swain silently looked at Emo Xiaobao, who didn't regard himself as an outsider at all. He sat down and picked up the fruit on the table to wipe it before starting to eat. He only felt a dull pain in his forehead. His intuition from living in the palace for a long time told him that this boy with a pure smile in front of him was very troublesome. Emo Xiaobao looked at Emo Swain, who was standing silently at the side, and waved his hand. "Come and sit." Emo Swain walked to the opposite side of Emo Xiaobao and sat down. Looking at him eating happily, he secretly wondered if Prince Ding never allowed the heir to eat his fill. "What brings you here?" Emo Xiaobao smiled brightly at him and said, "To come and play with you. Lord Father said that I am the host and should take good care of the guests. I was afraid that you would be lonely, so I came to find you to play." Play? Emo Swain was a little confused. It wasn't that Emo Swain didn't know what was good for him as a guest, but he really couldn't understand when he had such a good relationship with the little heir of the Prince Ding mansion that they could go and play together. Emo Xiaobao raised his chin and looked at him proudly. "How is it? Are you going or not?" Meeting Emo Xiaobao's provocative gaze, Emo Swain suddenly gritted his teeth and nodded heavily. "I'll go. I'm also an emperor, why would I be afraid of you, a heir? So, little emperor, you're certain that Emo Xiaobao won't dare to kill you, so you're going out to play with him?" Chapter 1058. Emo Swain got up and was about to open the door and leave. Emo Xiaobao hurriedly pulled him back and said, "What are you doing?" Emo Swain looked at him strangely and said, "Aren't you going out to play?" Emo Xiaobao rolled his eyes and pointed to the half-opened window, saying, "I came in from there. How are you going to tell others why I appeared in Dechu State's post house? If Imperial Father finds out, I will be in big trouble." "Then what do you want to do?" Emo Xiaobao pointed to the window with a pure smile and said, "Let's climb over the wall." "Climb over the wall?" Emo Swain almost exclaimed. Emo Xiaobao had already jumped onto the window by himself. He held onto the window with one hand and looked outside before turning back and saying, "Are you afraid?" Emo Swain took a deep breath and said, "Who's afraid? Let's go." "That's more like it." Emo Xiaobao nodded and jumped down from the window. Emo Swain was shocked and hurriedly climbed up to take a look. He saw Emo Xiaobao leaning against the corner of the wall and waving at him impatiently. Emo Swain didn't know martial arts and climbed down from the window in a sorry state. He followed behind Emo Xiaobao and walked stealthily in the post house. They actually managed to find their way out of the post house's back door without being discovered by anyone. It was obvious that this wasn't the first time Emo Xiaobao had done this. Outside the post house's back door, a few figures surrounded them the moment they stepped out and pulled them along as they ran. After stopping at a safe place, Emo Swain finally had the time to size up the few people in front of him. Only then did he realize that these few people in front of him were actually children younger than him. Looking at Emo Xiaobao, who was half a head shorter than him, a feeling of being an adult and a sense of mission arose spontaneously. "Brother Xiaobao, this is the little emperor from Dechu State?" Leng Junhan, who was wearing a white brocade robe, was still young, but she already had some of her father's demeanor. She slowly fanned herself with a small fan in her hand. Those who didn't know would think that she was a hedonistic son of a rich family. At the side, Su Jirui, who had inherited his father's solemn expression, looked at Emo Swain and frowned. "If you don't change your clothes, you'll be discovered." Emo Swain broke out in a cold sweat from being stared at by these two little radish heads that didn't even reach his chin. Beside them, Mu Lai, who had changed his name to Qin Lai, casually threw a bundle over and said, "I knew you would forget. Clothes." Emo Xiaobao raised his eyebrows in disdain. "I didn't change my clothes, but didn't I still walk out of there? What tight security. They can't even withstand a single blow." Father was right. What they were playing with was their heartbeat. Kidnapping the Dechu State's little emperor from the post house. How fun would that be? Pretending to be a servant and sneaking out was not challenging at all. Leng Junhan looked at Emo Swain with a smile and drooled. "Little emperor, this is my first time seeing a real emperor." Emo Swain's head was covered in cold sweat. He had always felt that the Chu Palace was filled with danger, but at this moment he suddenly felt that he would rather go back and face the Empress Dowager and those officials than face these kids who obviously had mental problems. Did this white and tender little bun in front of him think that he was a roast duck? That drooling look. Emo Swain decided that he had to stay away from this white and tender little fool. If Leng Junhan knew what Emo Swain was thinking, she would definitely cry out that she was wronged. He just hadn't seen an emperor before. After all, the most important person he had seen in his life was the prince. Although this prince was a top figure that many emperors were afraid of, he wasn't an emperor. It wasn't easy to see a living little emperor, so the extremely curious Leng Junhan naturally had to study him carefully. Qin Lai glanced at the uneasy little emperor with a faint smile. He did look better than Emo Swain, but he didn't see anything else. He was casually kidnapped by the little prince. Didn't he consider how many people would be frightened by the sudden disappearance of the Dechu State's little emperor from the post house? However, Qin Lai didn't care about this. How the little prince liked to play was his business. He only needed to be responsible for their safety. Under Emo Xiaobao's urging, Emo Swain went to change into an ordinary set of clothes that Qin Lai had prepared. This way, these few children looked like a group of ordinary children from wealthy families. Glass City was now filled with many influential families and wealthy merchants. Normally, there would be children from influential families playing on the streets, so no one would pay attention to them even if they were walking on the streets. Emo Swain was born in the palace and only went out twice in his life. The first time was when he followed the Dechu State's imperial court to the south, and the second time was when he came north to Glass City. Naturally, everything they saw was new and interesting to them. Aside from Qin Lai, who was experienced and knowledgeable, even Leng Junhan and Su Jirui had grown up running all over the place and were already used to it. Rather than going out to play, it was more like these few children accommodating this country bumpkin Emperor Emo Swain and strolling around. When Emo Swain felt a little hungry, Emo Xiaobao very generously led him to the best restaurant in Glass City for a meal. The waiter of the restaurant was obviously very familiar with Emo Xiaobao's group. When he saw them enter, he came forward and led them to the quietest room on the second floor. Emo Swain sat in the room and tried his best to suppress his curiosity and uneasiness. He asked, Prince, do you come here often? Emo Xiaobao smiled and said, not often. We come once in a while, but the food here is delicious. You don't have to be polite. This restaurant belongs to Qin Lai's family, they won't take our money. Qin Lai silently rolled his eyes. Even if you're eating for free, you don't have to say it so openly, okay? Little Prince, do you still remember that this little emperor is your enemy? Emo Swain looked at them enviously and said, it's good to be like you. Leng Junhan blinked and tilted her head to look at him. If you like, you can stay and play with us. We won't bully you. Among this group of people, Leng Junhan had the best impression of Emo Swain. Although this good impression was built on the fact that he was the first emperor she had seen. Emo Swain was stunned and shook his head. I can't stay. Leng Junhan nodded in understanding. I know. You're the emperor of Dechu State. Is it fun to be the emperor? Emo Swain shook his head bitterly. It's not fun at all. Not fun? Leng Junhan touched her head and asked, Brother Xiaobao, do you still want to be the emperor? The little emperor said that being the emperor isn't fun. Emo Xiaobao snorted in disdain. This prince will be Prince Ding in the future. What's so great about being the emperor? This prince wants to be Prince Ding, understand? The emperor is older than Prince Ding. Su Zhiwei calmly taught his cousin basic knowledge. Emo Xiaobao glanced at him. Which emperor dares to say that he's older than father? Everyone looked at each other and shrugged in the end. Indeed, in this world, at least for now, there probably wasn't any emperor who dared to challenge Prince Ding. Su Zhiwei insisted. Even so, the emperor is still older. Chapter 1059. Emo Xiaobao frowned and thought for a while before saying, all right, then I still want to be Prince Ding first. If he did not step on his imperial father, how could he stand up again? There was no need to think about being the emperor. Emo Xiaobao confidently calculated in his heart. Emo Suiyun ate the fragrant dishes on the table while saying, what if you don't become Prince Ding, what will you do? Emo Xiaobao looked at him strangely and said, why won't I become Prince Ding? Isn't there a little prince in the Prince Ding mansion? Emo Suiyun said casually, just like how the throne is not necessarily passed to the crown prince, the Prince Ding position is not necessarily passed to the eldest son. And Emo Xiaobao thought for a while and nodded. You are right. Thank you for your reminder, I will do my best to spur Lin to be a good younger brother. Emo Suiyun smiled faintly and said, you're welcome, I just casually mentioned it, you don't have to take it to heart. Oh right, Emo Suiyun. I heard that the Empress Dowager of Dechu State is very fierce. Is your grandmother good to you? Emo Xiaobao's eyes turned as he asked with concern. Emo Suiyun's hand that was holding the chopsticks paused and said with a smile, grandmother is very good to me. You are so fortunate, my father is very fierce to me. You are the emperor. Everyone has to listen to you. I am the little prince. My father bullies me all the time. Emo Xiaobao sighed enviously. Emo Suiyun's smile was somewhat bitter. How could he be so fortunate as the emperor? Sometimes he couldn't even order the servants around him, not to mention everyone else listening to him. Looking at Emo Xiaobao, who was innocently asking him all sorts of questions, as well as Leng Junhan, Su Zhiwei, and Qin Lai, who were happily eating at the side, Emo Swain suddenly felt a bit of jealousy in his heart. Why could they live such a carefree and happy life, while he had to carefully live his life in the Chu Palace like he was treading on thin ice? I will definitely be more powerful than my father in the future. Emo Xiaobao slapped the table and shouted loudly. Leng Junhan and the others who were eating next to him glanced at him silently, then ignored him and continued to eat. Xiaobao immediately refused to comply and shouted, I will definitely be more powerful than father. Emo Suiyun looked at his angry look and said with a smile, I believe in you. You definitely will. Hearing his words, Emo Xiaobao immediately became happy. He patted his shoulder and said, that's right. I knew we were on the same side. In the future you will definitely be more powerful than your father. Let's work together. The corner of Emo Suiyun's lips twitched. He was a little unsure if Emo Xiaobao's words were a blessing or a curse. Although he didn't have any impression of his father, he still knew that he was a failure as an emperor. But when she saw Xiaobao's sincere expression as he gnawed on a crystal pork shoulder, she decided to treat it as a blessing. By the time Emo Jingyu finally found them after making a ruckus in Glass City, the children had already finished their meal and were scattered all over the place. As soon as they opened the door, they saw a table full of delicacies that had been ruined. Only the leftovers were placed messily on the table. Lung Junhan was full from eating and was lying on the couch rubbing her stomach. The others were huddled together and chattering about something. Of course, most of the time it was Emo Xiaobao who was talking. The cold-faced Su Jirui would occasionally add a few words. The remaining two were purely listeners. Your Majesty. Emo Jingyu called out in a deep voice. Emo Suiyun was startled. Only then did he remember that Emo Jingyu didn't know that he had run out of the inn. He hurriedly wanted to stand up, but Emo Xiaobao said in a low voice, "Don't be afraid of him. You're the emperor. You don't have to be afraid of him." Emo Suiyun cast a grateful glance at him, then stood up and said, "Uncle Wang, what's the matter?" Emo Jingyu raised his eyebrows. Before he could say anything, Feng Jiao walked out from behind him with a smile and said, "King Yu, didn't you see what I said? How could something happen to the emperor in Glass City?" Emo Jingyu suppressed the anger in his heart and nodded at Feng Jiao before asking, "Your Majesty, why are you here?" Emo Suiyun said in a low voice, I came out to play with the little prince." Emo Jingyu took a deep breath and said, "If your Majesty wants to come out to play in the future, it's better to bring people along so that the people below won't worry." Emo Suiyun nodded and said, "Uncle Wang, I know I was wrong." Seeing that he really knew he was wrong, Emo Jingyu nodded and this matter was considered over. Emo Suiyun had always been obedient. His sudden disappearance from the inn had indeed frightened the people of Dechu State. Fortunately, news quickly came from the Prince Ding mansion that Emo Suiyun, Emo Xiaobao and the others were eating here. Emo Jingyu looked inside and saw that the children were lying on the soft couch and looking at him innocently. Emo Jingyu really did not dare to believe that these children, who were several years younger than Emo Suiyun, were able to trick Emo Suiyun, the always cautious little emperor, into sneaking out of the inn to play. Emo Xiaobao felt that he should say something. He blinked and said to Emo Jingyu, "King Yu, don't be angry at Brother Suiyun. It's all my fault. Originally I wanted to go to the inn to visit Brother Suiyun, but he refused to see me. In a moment of anger I secretly ran to his room. Brother Suiyun couldn't stand my pleading and only came out to play with us." Emo Jingyu smiled faintly and said, "Your Highness's words are too serious. In the future, Your Highness can directly come to the inn to play with Your Majesty. However, right now the entire inn is looking for Your Majesty. We should go back." Emo Suiyun obediently stood up and followed Emo Jingyu. Emo Xiaobao did not forget to reluctantly send him to the door and promised that he would come to play with him tomorrow. Feng Jiao leaned against the door and looked at the four little rascals with a radiant smile, asking, "How was it? Is the little emperor of Dechu State fun?" Lung Junhan shook her head and said, "Not fun. He's so silly." Su Jirui tilted his head and thought, "Not fun. He's so hypocritical." Qin Lai rolled his eyes. "He's even more annoying than Emo Suiyun." Emo Suiyun was timid and weak. When the time came he would not be so timid, but he was too scheming. Emo Xiaobao smiled and touched his little chin. "Fun? He's so silly and scheming. He actually wants to sow discord. My little brother is not even a year old yet." Chapter 1060. Emo Suiyun, who was brought back to the post house by Emo Jingyu, naturally didn't know what the brats were saying about him. He also didn't have the mood to think about it. As a newly ascended little emperor who was no better than a puppet, he naturally couldn't avoid being admonished and reprimanded by Emo Jingyu. Therefore Emo Suiyun also understood that before he had real power he didn't have the right to copy Emo Xiaobao. Even if he didn't like the heartless Prince Ding Mansion's little heir and his friends, he didn't have the right to compete with the Prince Ding Mansion's little heir unless he had real power in Dechu State. Therefore, Emo Suiyun quickly put aside today's matter and focused all his attention on dealing with Emo Jingyu and the officials of Dechu State. At this moment the little emperor Emo Suiyun didn't think that he who was tricked by the heartless Emo Xiaobao with a few words was even more heartless than a certain someone, to the extent that he suffered countless losses in the hands of a certain someone. In the restaurant, after Emo Xiaobao and the others sent off Emo Suiyun, the outsider, and Feng Jiao, the suspected spy of Prince Ding, they closed the door and started discussing again. Emo Xiaobao cupped his chin and looked at Qin Lai, asking, "Royal father seems to think highly of this Emo Suiyun. Qin Lai, do you think Emo Suiyun will win or be as unlucky as Emo Suiyun?" Qin Lai thought for a while and shook his head, saying, "It's hard to say. Emo Swayun is definitely more daring and scheming than Emo Swain. I just don't know if Emo Jinyu has any ambition. Lung Junhan lay on the soft couch and said lazily, doesn't the Chu state have an old witch? She definitely wants to help her grandson. Other than Emo Swayun, the Chu state shouldn't have many princes, right? They can't be casually swapped. The Chu state's Empress Dowager is also very old, Su Jirui said seriously with a cold face. Emo Xiaobao blinked and said faintly, so? Emo Suayun's chances of winning are still very high? As long as he's not an idiot. But he really does seem a little silly. Lung Junhan said worriedly. In her opinion, anyone who could be fooled by Xiaobao Emo was a fool. A person like Xiaobao Emo couldn't even be trusted with a single expression. Xiaobao rolled his eyes and said, then let's remind him. We're good friends. Whatever. Lung Junhan and Su Jirui didn't mind. Lung Junhan continued to rub her stomach while Su Jirui sat by the side and read a book with great interest. Qin Lai faintly glanced at the three children who were a few years younger than him. When he first met these guys he felt that he was indeed a good person. After spending some time together he began to wonder if he would still be a good person in the future. On the other side of the room, Yi Li and Emo Xiuyao sat leisurely as they listened to the children next door discuss the big plan. Feng Jiao, Leng Haoyu and the others sat at the side and looked at Emo Xiuyao with a smile. When they finished their discussion, the sound of the children's footsteps could be heard from outside. Feng Jiao couldn't help but laugh out loud. He shook his head in pain and said, what kind of evil has this world done to give birth to such evildoers? How old were these children? They were already thinking about how to scheme against the little emperors of other countries. Even when they were at this age they were still fighting and playing truant. What would happen after a few years? Leng Haoyu sighed helplessly and said, one is marked by the company one keeps. Our Junhan has been led astray. Back then his precious son was a soft and cute little bun. Of course his son was also very cute now, but his personality was slightly twisted. This was definitely a case of one is marked by the company one keeps. Leng Haoyu felt a little guilty. It was all because he didn't have time to take care of his son that he got too close to Emo Xiaobao from the Prince Ding mansion. It was really a case of one is marked by the company one keeps. You speak as if your son is innocent. Emo Xiuyao lazily glanced at Leng Haoyu. Emo Xiaobao looked listless and bad, but that brat from the Leng family was wearing a layer of silly outer clothing. Feng Jiao said with some curiosity, looking at Emo Xiaobao's intention, he wants to help the little emperor of the Dechu state. Is this not a problem? One had to know that the little emperor wasn't someone easy to deal with. He knew how to sow discord at such a young age and he hit the nail on the head. Although he was a little immature and didn't fool Emo Xiaobao, one had to know that the little emperor had only ascended the throne for less than 2 months. Before that he was raised without anyone to discipline him. From this point of view, as long as someone gave him some pointers, the little emperor's future achievements would be limitless. Emo Xiuyao said indifferently, what problem can there be? Even if there is a problem, it's his problem. Don't tell me I can kill all the people who are a threat for him. He wasn't a father who spoiled his child. You're really at ease. Feng Jiao and Leng Haoyu looked at each other, then looked at Yi Li disapprovingly. Yi Li smiled faintly. That little emperor wants to control the real power of the Dechu state. No matter how talented he is, it won't be possible without 10 years. There's no need to worry now. Compared to spending 10 years to let Emo Jinyu or any other adult control the power, it was better to give the little emperor 10 years to fight for power. 10 years later, no matter if it was Emo Xiaobao or the entire Prince Ding mansion, they would have recovered from the 2 years of war. At that time, Emo Suayun might not be able to fully control the real power of the Dechu state. To put it bluntly, Emo Xiaobao didn't have any intention of helping Emo Suayun. He just didn't want Emo Suayun to be finished so quickly. It had to be said that from a certain point of view, Emo Xiaobao had already begun to take the shape of his father. Children nowadays are really amazing, Feng Jiao sighed. Or was it that the children of the Prince Ding mansion were especially abnormal? Princess. Yaoji asked for an audience at the door. Ever since returning to Glass City, Yaoji returned to the restaurant she had been running for several years and lived a peaceful life. However, she would occasionally collect some information for the Prince Ding mansion. In general, she lived a normal life. King Yu seems to have secretly sent someone to contact King Chongqing. Yaoji reported in a low voice. Emo Xiuyao waved his hand, as expected. What's King Chongqing's attitude? Yaoji said, King Chongqing didn't send anyone to King Yu. He probably doesn't want to have too much to do with them. Mo Shuyao nodded, that brother and sister aren't stupid. As long as they don't do anything we don't have to worry about them. Leng Haoyu pondered for a moment and said, I remember. King Chongqing and Princess Zhenning still have a younger brother in Nanjing. Will there be any trouble at that time? Even if the Dechu state was now peaceful in Jiangnan, it would definitely not be so peaceful. Who knows, they might do something with the little prince. They still had to be on guard. Mo Shuyao said indifferently, they live a peaceful life. I naturally won't treat them unfairly. If they do something they shouldn't do, don't blame I for being merciless. Keep an eye on them. Chapter 1061. Yaoji nodded and hesitated for a moment before saying, it seems like someone saw Mo Jingli appear in the northwest. Mo Jingli? Everyone was stunned. They were surprised to hear this name. Ever since Liang was broken, Mo Jingli had disappeared without a trace. It wasn't that they didn't think of cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots, but it was because Feihong Pass was in a state of emergency that they couldn't find the time to do so. After that, when the display was over, Mo Jingli had already disappeared without a trace. In this world there was a sea of people. If one really wanted to hide, it wouldn't be easy to find someone. Moreover, Mo Jingli had been stripped of his throne. He didn't have any troops or power in his hands. His martial arts weren't that high either, so not many people cared about his whereabouts. Are you sure? Mo Shuyao frowned and asked. Yaoji shook her head and said, I can't be sure for now. Mo Shuyao thought for a moment and said, reveal this news to Mo Jingyu. Mo Jingyu, who now held the power of the Dechu state, probably didn't want to see Mo Jingli appear more than them, right? This subordinate obeys. Yaoji nodded and replied. In a small hidden village outside of Glass City, a man wearing coarse clothes with a face full of beard sat in a simple room with a twisted expression, lost in thought. Your Majesty. A similarly dressed man walked in and bowed. The man turned to look at him and said coldly, is there any news from Glass City? The man said in a deep voice, King Yu has already brought the newly ascended Emperor Mo Suiyun to Glass City. At the same time, the newly appointed Genom of Gojoseon, Lei Tingfeng, also arrived. Today, the little heir of Prince Ding's residence secretly brought Mo Suiyun and sneaked out. Mo Jingyu almost overturned this Glass City. In the end, he found the little emperor in a restaurant. The man in coarse clothes, Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of ruthlessness. He sneered and said, Mo Jingyu really thinks highly of this Mo Suiyun. I didn't expect that the one who would stab me in the back would be him. In fact, Mo Jingli wasn't the only one who had stabbed him in the back. The Empress Dowager, the ministers and nobles in the court, and even the entire Dechu state's imperial family. From this, it could be seen how unpopular Mo Jingli was. The man hesitated for a moment before carefully asking, Your Majesty, should we? Mo Jingli sneered. No, send a message to Mo Jingyu. Tell him that we want to see him. This. Your Majesty, could this be? They could be considered to be fugitives right now. No matter if they were caught by the Prince Ding mansion or the Dechu state's imperial court, they would definitely not have a good ending. At this time, the emperor still wanted to take the initiative to deliver himself to the door. How could people not worry? Mo Jingli said in a low voice, we only know what to do. Go and do it. After hesitating for a moment, the man nodded and turned to leave. Mo Jingli lowered his eyes to stare at the somewhat crude and dirty table in front of him. His expression kept changing. 2 months ago, if someone had told him that he would one day wear crude and dirty rags and live in this shabby room that could barely shelter him from the wind and rain, he would definitely have torn that person to pieces. But in this month, Mo Jingli could be said to have suffered a lot. In order to avoid the Prince Ding mansion and the Dechu state's imperial court search, he not only disguised himself as a commoner and ate coarse food, but he even had to deal with beggars and vagabonds. He suffered a lot and took countless dangerous paths to avoid everyone's eyes and ears to sneak into the vicinity of Glass City. His goal naturally wasn't just to take a look. Although he was in such dire straits right now, Mo Jingli had been a prince and an emperor for decades. He more or less had some hidden cards in his hands that no one knew about. It was because of this that he had the courage to sneak into the northwest and find his way to the Mahist army's headquarters, Glass City. But he wasn't in a hurry to enter the city. Right now Glass City was definitely heavily guarded. Although there weren't many people who could recognize him, Mo Jingli had already experienced the power of the Mahist army's shadow guard. So he didn't want to be too impatient and take the risk. As for Mo Jingli, a cold smile appeared on Mo Jingli's face. He dared to meet Mo Jingyu openly, so he naturally had enough chips to protect himself. In an inconspicuous little tea house in Glass City, Mo Jingyu pushed open the door to a side room and saw the man in plain clothes sitting inside. He raised his eyebrows and said, "You're quite daring." Indeed, he was quite daring. If it was someone else, they definitely wouldn't dare to sneak into the Mahist army's headquarters. Mo Jingli lightly snorted. He sized up Mo Jingyu for a moment and said mockingly, "You're holding great power now. We really didn't expect that in the end. The one who would benefit from it would be you." Mo Jingyu didn't mind. He cupped his hands and smiled, "You're too polite. It's just a coincidence. What business do you have with me?" Mo Jingyu didn't place Mo Jingli in his eyes at all. In the past he was the powerful Prince Li Emperor Chu. But now he was the assistant prince of the Dechu state. And Mo Jingli was just a stray dog who had to hide in a sorry state. Thinking of this, Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a trace of pleasure. Mo Jingli said, "Of course there's a business. I want you to help me do something." "Why do you think I'll agree?" Mo Jingyu raised his eyebrows. Mo Jingli looked at him and asked, "Then, do you want the Dechu state's imperial jade seal?" "So it was you who took the imperial jade seal." Mo Jingyu's face darkened as he said coldly. Ever since Mo Jingli's disappearance, whether it was in Nanjing or Liang, the Dechu state's imperial jade seal had not been found. The imperial jade seal symbolized the supreme imperial power. Although it wasn't impossible to make another one, if the imperial jade seal was left outside, it would be a huge joke to the Dechu state's imperial family. If someone came out with the imperial jade seal to cause trouble in the future, it would be even more troublesome. So the Dechu state's imperial family secretly sent people to search for Mo Jingli. One reason was to get rid of him, and the other was to find the imperial jade seal's whereabouts. Mo Jingli smiled, "You don't have to help me. We can also give the imperial jade seal to someone else." Of course, there's also Prince Yu's smiling face. This someone else was naturally his political enemy. For example, ever since the new emperor ascended the throne, his brothers who gradually wanted to compete with him or the Empress Dowager. Right now Mo Jingchi was dead and Mo Jingli was stranded outside. The Empress Dowager was old and the emperor was young. There were more and more people who had other thoughts. If the imperial jade seal fell into someone else's hands, it wouldn't be a good thing for Mo Jingyu. "What do you want me to do?" Mo Jingyu asked in a low voice. Mo Jingli said coldly, "I want you to help me get rid of Mo Suiyun and Mo Yuchen." "You're crazy." Mo Jingyu stood up and turned to leave. "You really won't consider it?" Mo Jingli's voice came from behind. Mo Jingyu turned around and sneered, "Consider it? Do you think I'm stupid? Kill Mo Yuchen in Glass City? Don't mention killing Mo Yuchen. I'm afraid if I touch a single hair on his head, I'll die without a complete corpse." The imperial jade seal was very attractive, but even if he gave the throne to him he had to be alive to enjoy it. "You think I can't do it?" Mo Jingli wasn't nervous at all. Compared to Mo Jingyu he didn't need to be too nervous. He had already lost everything he could. The only thing he had left was probably his own life. However, Mo Jingli couldn't live in hiding forever. Rather than that he might as well fight to the death. But Mo Jingyu was different. He had endured for half his life. Now that he finally had power he naturally had to be careful with every step, afraid that he would make a mistake. Chapter 1062. Mo Jingyu smiled coldly, not even bothering to answer this question. Ever since Mo Shuyao drew a clear line between himself and the Dechu state he had never thought that Mo Jingli or Mo Jingchi would be able to defeat him. Even Mo Jingli, who was once the ruler of a country, was unable to do so, let alone this Mo Jingli who was currently hiding from place to place. Mo Jingli did not mind his disdain. He smiled and said, "Since that's the case we can first show you my sincerity. How about Mo Xiaoyun?" "What do you mean?" Mo Jingyu asked warily. Mo Jingli said, "Mo Xiaoyun and Zhen Ning are living very freely in Glass City." "That's right, they are Mo Jingqi's princes and princesses, but they have sought refuge in the Prince Ding mansion. Even if it was for the sake of the people of the world, Ding Palace would definitely protect them well. Say, if Mo Xiaoyun and Zhen Ning suddenly died under the protection of the Prince Ding mansion, what would happen? More interestingly, if they died on the eve of the Prince Ding mansion's little heir and princess' first birthday banquet, Mo Xiaoyao's expression would definitely change. If you think it's not enough, how about adding in the Queen of Nanzhao? Mo Jingli continued, his eyes flashing with the same expression. Mo Jingyu looked at him calmly and said, "You want to ruin the Prince Ding mansion's banquet. What's the point of that?" Before the Prince Ding mansion's banquet, the Prince of Chongqing and Princess Zhen Ning, who died under the protection of the Prince Ding mansion, was naturally a ruthless slap to the Prince Ding mansion's face. And if something happened to the Queen of Nanzhao in Glass City, the Prince Ding mansion would most likely have to give Nanzhao an explanation. We want to see if Mo Xiaoyao's expression will change? Mo Jingli smiled happily. "You're really crazy," Mo Jingyu said in a low voice. Mo Jingli's expression changed as he said angrily, "That's right. This emperor is crazy. This was all because of Mo Xiaoyao. I was forced by you. You traitors. You traitor." Mo Jingli sneered. Looking at Mo Jingli's crazed and twisted expression, he indifferently said, "You speak as if you are loyal to your country? Why do you think all the civil and military officials agreed to depose you? Mo Jingli, even if you return to Jiangnan now, you will only be a rat that everyone hates. Using the southern border's secret medicine to kill 2 previous emperors, who would dare to recognize you as their master." Empress Dowager. Mo Jingli gritted his teeth. Only the Empress Dowager knew the truth. Mo Jingyu smiled. "Isn't that so? Even your own mother has turned her back on you. This shows how much of a failure you are. What right do you have to call others rebels and traitors? What kind of betrayal was this? At most, what we are doing is driving out the rebels and upholding the orthodoxy." Unexpectedly, Mo Jingli did not explode in anger. After a long silence, he finally opened his mouth. "This emperor does not wish to speak nonsense with you. Do you need my help or not?" Mo Jingyu shook his head. "Forgive me for being unable to help. Goodbye." 3 years ago, how did you spend the 300,000 taels of silver that you took from the northern tribes? Mo Jingli's sinister voice came from behind him. Mo Jingyu suddenly turned around, his face ashen as he glared at Mo Jingli. "I do not know what you are talking about. It's fine if you don't know. If others know, then keep it in their hearts. For example, Uncle Wang or the other brothers? What do you think?" Mo Jingli coldly smiled. Mo Jingyu was silent for a long time. Finally, he walked back and sat down. He stared at Mo Jingli for a long time before saying, "How do I know if you are lying to me?" Mo Jingli smiled. "You can give it a try. When you return to Nanjing, will you become a rat that everyone wants to beat up like me? Tell me, between regicide and betrayal, which one is more hateful?" Mo Jingyu's face was as dark as ink. After a long time he said, "When did you?" Mo Jingli lightly snorted. "Naturally, I only found out after moving the capital to Jiangnan. Otherwise, do you think this emperor would tolerate you? At that time, this emperor also did not want to tolerate you. However, at that time the imperial court was already in a mess. Since you were still obedient, this emperor kept you. Now it seems, this emperor was right to keep you. If this time it was someone he did not have a handle on, this person would most likely have sold him to Mo Xiaoyao." Mo Jingli looked at him, his smile sinister. "You can go and tell Mo Xiaoyao. At most we will die together. In any case, this emperor has nothing to worry about." "I need to think about it." Mo Jingyu closed his eyes, speaking in a low voice. Clearly he was struggling fiercely in his heart. Mo Jingli shrugged, making a casual gesture. Mo Jingyu said, "If I help you, how will I escape? If I have to die, compared to dying in Mo Xiaoyao's hands, I would rather go back to Jiangnan." He had heard of Mo Xiaoyao's methods of torturing people. Anyone who had the slightest choice would definitely not be willing to fall into Mo Xiaoyao's hands. Mo Jingli's eyes flashed with a cold smile. He said mildly, "Don't worry, I don't need you to do too much. As long as you handle it well, no one will find out. When the time comes, you can naturally take the Imperial Jade Seal back to Jiangnan to be your king." Mo Jingyu took a deep breath, finally making up his mind. "Right, I promise you." Mo Jingli nodded in satisfaction. "Good. When this emperor is ready, this emperor will naturally inform you. You can go back first. Emo Jingyu stood up, walking towards the door. When he reached the door, he stopped, staring at Emo Jingli. You better be careful. If anything happens, we'll all die together. Seeing Emo Jingli's figure disappear through the door, the smile on Emo Jingli's face became even more twisted and sinister. I of course will die together. Otherwise why would I look for you? Unfortunately you don't know that Emo Xiaoyao's specialty is not torturing people, but venting his anger. Whether or not it was related to Emo Xiaoyao, whether or not there was evidence, as long as something happened to Emo Yuchen, Emo Xiaoyao would definitely vent his anger on everyone, including the royal family of Dechu State far away in Jiangnan. Since you've betrayed this emperor, then let's die together. Unfortunately, if he could drag Emo Xiaoyao and Yili down with him, it would be even better. Chapter 1063. In the study of the Prince Ding mansion, Emo Xiaoyao, Yili, Su Qingchen, and the others were discussing matters when Qin Feng came to request an audience. Prince's consort, Qin Feng requests an audience. Yili frowned slightly. Come in. What's the matter? Qin Feng stepped into the study and scanned the people in the room. Su Qingchen, Feng Jiao, Han Mingyue, and the others were all trusted by the prince's consort. He did not hesitate any longer and reported in a deep voice. Emo Jingyu secretly went to a small tea house in the city to meet someone. This subordinate suspects that this person is Emo Jingli. Emo Xiaoyao raised his brows and asked, Where is he? Qin Feng lowered his head in shame. He slipped away. That tea house is very likely Emo Jingli's secret base in Glass City. Prince, please punish us. By the time the Prince Ding Mansion's people had sneaked in, the entire tea house was already empty. It was clear that this place was specially set up, and there was even a secret passage for people to escape. Emo Xiaoyao waved his hand and said indifferently, There is no such thing as an airtight wall in this world. You can't be blamed for this. Can you be sure that it is Emo Jingli? What does he want from Emo Jingyu? Han Mingyue smiled. Emo Jingli still dares to come to Glass City. His intentions are clear. As for Emo Jingli, I'm afraid that he has something on him and is being blackmailed. Su Qingchen nodded, agreeing with Han Mingyue's opinion. Looking at Emo Xiaoyao and Yili, he said, Let Xiaobao be more careful in this period of time. Although Emo Jingli might hate Emo Xiaoyao and Yili more with their abilities, it was very difficult to harm them. And Emo Xiaobao, who had yet to grow up, would naturally become the most obvious weakness. Yili nodded solemnly and remembered Su Qingchen's reminder. In fact, she was planning to send more people to protect Emo Xiaobao. No matter how smart Emo Xiaobao was, he was only a 10-year-old child. Feng Jiao frowned and said, Emo Jingli has become smarter. Even the shadow guards of the Prince Ding Mansion can't catch him. Han Mingyue laughed and said, It's not that I've become smarter, it's just that I'm like a bird startled by the twang of a bow and afraid of death. If he had really become smarter, he wouldn't have come to Glass City. Leng Haoyu said worriedly, For him to be able to sneak into Glass City, it at least proves that he has some useful people under him. I'm afraid that now that he has nothing left, I'm afraid that he wants to die together with the Prince Ding Mansion. This kind of person is always dangerous. It's better to catch him as soon as possible. Everyone nodded. Idiots weren't scary, smart people weren't scary. The scariest thing was a madman who thought he was smart and wasn't afraid of death. Because it was hard to guess what he wanted to do. Hearing Leng Haoyu's words, Emo Xiaoyao raised his eyebrows thoughtfully. Su Qingchen glanced at him and asked, Prince, do you have any plans? Emo Xiaoyao smiled faintly and said, It's just Emo Jingli, don't worry too much about him. I have my own plans. There are still a few days until Lin Er and Xin Er's first birthday banquet. You should put in more effort. There seems to be a lot of people coming this year. Feng Jiao nodded and smiled. That's right, other than the northern tribes, Dechu State and Shiling's envoys who are already in Glass City, the queen and her husband of the southern Zhao, Princess Helan of the northern territories and the envoys of the western regions are already on their way. They'll reach Glass City in a few days. Looks like Qing Ming and Zhang Qilan are doing well in Xiling? Emo Xiaoyao stroked his chin and smiled. The emperor of Xiling's city was located in the far west, bordering the western regions. However, the relationship between Xiling and the western regions had always been in a state of hostility. Not to mention the fact that the western regions sent envoys to congratulate them, Even the trade routes between the two countries were often intermittent. In the early years, the trade routes between the western regions and the central plains were maintained by the Prince Ding Mansion and Xiling. It wasn't until the Mahist army took over most of the northern regions of Xiling that the trade between the central plains and the western regions was truly smooth. Su Qingchen smiled faintly and said, I heard that there were a few battles in the beginning. Now that the Prince Ding Mansion is rising like the sun, even the people of the western regions know how to read people's expressions. It's natural for them to send envoys to congratulate us. Oh right, Qingbai and the rest are also coming back with the envoys from the western regions. They'll be here in about 2 days. Su Qingchen nodded and said, Then, we'll leave the envoys of the western regions to Qingze? It just so happened that Su Qingze and Su Qingbai were brothers, so if there were any problems they could communicate with each other. Su Qingchen and Su Qingze nodded, indicating that they had no objections. After the discussion everyone left. Yili looked at Emo Xiuyao and asked, What do you plan to do about Emo Jingli? Emo Xiuyao took her into his arms and laughed softly. Don't be nervous, there are many people following Xiaobao. He's not someone easy to deal with either. If he really meets Emo Jingli, it's hard to say who will be at a disadvantage. Yili frowned and said unhappily, He's still a child. In the Prince Ding Mansion, there are no children after the age of 10. We can't always be by his side. There will be a day when he has to be independent. Yili sighed silently. Although she understood that Emo Xiuyao was doing this for the sake of Xiaobao, but for a child who was born in the spring breeze and grew up under the red flag, even though he was born into a military family, he still grew up like a normal child. It was very hard for Yili to accept this kind of situation where a child was treated like an adult. In her previous life, when she was 10 years old, she was still fooling around with a group of girls and boys in the courtyard. But the current situation did not allow Xiaobao to slowly grow up. With Emo Xiuyao's personality and plans, it was obvious that he planned to hand over the Prince Ding Mansion to Xiaobao as soon as possible, while he himself lived a carefree life. In order to prevent a certain someone from suddenly leaving and causing Xiaobao to panic, starting to train Xiaobao now was the right choice. Lili, don't worry, Xiaobao is also my son. Until Yili worried about Xiaobao's safety, Emo Xiuyao softly comforted her. He was helpless towards Yili's excessive worry. No matter how much of a bastard Xiaobao was, he was still his son. As a father, he would not kill his own son. Could it be that he treated Xiaobao too badly, causing Lili to be so worried? It was rare for Prince Ding to have a guilty conscience. Yili faintly smiled and said, I know, but I can't help but worry. You know, sometimes rationality and emotions are two different things. Not to mention that Emo Xiaobao was still a 10-year-old child. Even if he became the world's #1 expert like Emo Xiuyao, as a mother she still had to worry. Since you already have a plan, you can do as you see fit. I will take good care of Lin Er and Exu. If Emo Jingli really went crazy, Xiaobao would not be the only one in danger. Lin Er and Exu would also be in danger. I promise that Xiaobao will be safe. Emo Xiuyao solemnly promised. I know. Yili nodded with a faint smile. Reporting to Prince Consort, something has happened. Outside the door, Qin Feng rushed in with an ugly expression. Yili stood up. What's wrong? Qin Feng had always been a steady person. If it wasn't something big, he definitely would not be so impulsive as to break into the study. Qin Feng said in a deep voice, the Queen of Nanzhao was attacked not far from Glass City. The Queen and little prince are missing. Chapter 1064. What? Not only Yili but even Emo Xiuyao's face revealed a trace of surprise. Emo Xiuyao thought for a moment and frowned. Why would the Queen of Nanzhao bring the prince to Glass City? Last year, Princess Anxi gave birth to a little prince in the Central Plains. Yili and Emo Xiuyao were not in Glass City at that time. The child was only half a year old now. Even if the Queen of Nanzhao came to Glass City to congratulate them, she would not bring the little prince because of the long journey. Qin Feng said, Princess Anxi and her husband did not return to the country after leaving Glass City last year. They continued to travel in the Central Plains. They were planning to return to the country, but when they heard that the Prince Ding Mansion was holding a birthday banquet for the little prince and princess, they returned with the little prince. They did not expect that they would be assassinated by a group of unknown people less than 100 li from Glass City. Her husband was seriously injured and the whereabouts of the queen and the little prince are unknown. Where is Her Highness? Let him in, Yili said hurriedly. Soon Pu'er, the king of Nanjiao, walked in. As expected, his luxurious blue Nanjiang clothes were stained with blood. Pu'er's arms and face were also injured. It was obvious that he had been through a fierce battle. Prince Ding, Princess Ding. Because Princess Anqi and Yili had a good relationship, Pu'er was also familiar with Emo Xiuyao and Yili. He did not stand on ceremony and said anxiously, Prince Ding, Princess, please save Anqi and the child. As he spoke, he bowed in front of Emo Xiuyao and Yili. The men of Nanjiang were very proud and would not kneel to others easily. The disappearance of his wife and son had already made this man panic. Emo Xiuyao hurriedly reached out to support him and said in a low voice, Pu'er, don't worry. As long as the Queen of Nanjiao is still in the northwest, I guarantee that I will be able to find her. The Prince Ding mansion will also give Nanjiao an explanation for this matter. Emo Xiuyao had a natural ability to calm people's hearts and make them trust him. Hearing Prince Ding's words, Pu'er quickly calmed down. He took a deep breath and said, if there's anything I can help you with, please let me know, Prince Ding. As long as Anqi and the child can come back safely. Emo Xiuyao patted him on the shoulder and said, sit down first and tell I and Wang Fei what happened. Then go to the guest room and have a good rest. You're also badly injured. Pu'er nodded heavily. After sorting out his thoughts, he told him about the assassination attempt. It turned out that in the past 6 months, Princess Anqi and Pu'er had been traveling around with their children. In the past 6 months, the three forces of the Central Plains had been fighting. Princess Anqi accepted Yili's and Emo Xiuyao's advice and did not get involved. There was nothing much to do in Nanjiao, so the two of them did not remember to go back. This time, they heard that the Prince Ding mansion was going to hold a birthday banquet for the two little princes and the little princess. Given the relationship between Nanjiao and the Prince Ding mansion, it was impossible for them not to attend. So the two of them who had originally planned to go back to Nanjiao turned back. But they did not expect to be ambushed on a deserted official road not far from Li City. Pu'er led his guards to fight to the death, but the other side had a lot of people and they were not weak. They were caught off guard and were at a disadvantage from the beginning. In the end, Princess Anqi and the child were taken away. After hearing Pu'er's words, Emo Xiuyao and Yili looked at each other and gradually understood. Yili called Chief Steward Emo and asked Pu'er to go and rest. Pu'er had just left when he heard the news and came over. Feng Jiao and the others also arrived. I told you that Emo Jingli must be up to something. Leng Haoyu cursed in a low voice, but why did he kidnap Princess Anqi? Isn't he afraid that he will disturb the Prince Ding mansion and alert us? Or does Emo Jingli really have the ability to ignore the Prince Ding mansion? Han Mingyue frowned and looked at Emo Xiuyao. There is no point in kidnapping Princess Anqi and Emo Jingli won't gain anything from it. The only possibility is that he wants to ruin the Prince Ding mansion's birthday banquet. If the envoys of the various countries who came to attend the banquet are assassinated or something happens, the envoys of the various countries were in the Prince Ding mansion's territory. Even if it had nothing to do with the Prince Ding mansion, the Prince Ding mansion would have to give an explanation to the various countries. Feng Jiao said in a low voice, if that's the case, he won't just make a move on Princess Anqi. There is also Princess Helan who is about to arrive at Glass City and the envoys of the western regions. To put it bluntly, Emo Jingli wanted to make things difficult for the Prince Ding mansion. Yili lowered her eyes and thought for a moment, then said in a low voice, Feng San, tell Emo Hua to send out the shadow guard of the Prince Ding mansion to receive the envoys of the various countries. They must make sure that these envoys arrive at Glass City safely. Also, send out 50,000 soldiers from the camp near Glass City and divide them into 500 men each. They will patrol the area around Glass City 24 hours a day. Order Qi Lin to send out 2 teams to guard Glass City. The other 4 teams will be stationed in the north, south, east and west. They will be ready to provide support if anything happens. Yes, Princess. Feng Jiao nodded and accepted the order. What do you all think about the Queen of Nanjiao? Emo Xiuyao asked. Everyone was silent. After a while, Leng Haoyu sighed in a low voice. I only hope that Emo Jingli will not harm Princess Anqi for the time being if he wants to negotiate with us. Otherwise, if the Queen of Nanjiao and the only prince died in Glass City, it would not be good for the relationship between the Prince Ding mansion and Nanjiao. Let's do our best to send people to search everywhere. Feng Jiao's voice was serious. Yili nodded and said, "Send out the order. We must be careful. We must ensure the safety of Princess Anqi and the little prince." Han Mingyue said, "Princess Anqi is not an ordinary person. Mo Jingli is walking around Glass City with such a woman and a child not even half a year old. It is impossible for him to not give himself away. Princess, there is no need to be too anxious." Yili thought for a moment, then said, "Then I will leave this matter to Master Mingyue." Han Mingyue was once the head of the largest intelligence organization in Dechu State. He should be more experienced than others in finding people. Han Mingyue cupped his hands and said with a smile, "I will not disappoint Princess." Yili sighed softly and said, "Thank you for your trouble, Master." In a cave somewhere outside Glass City, Princess Anqi woke up from her slumber. She rubbed her aching forehead and a sharp glint flashed across her eyes. She immediately regained her consciousness and looked around. "Are you looking for him?" A man's voice came from not far away. He carried a bit of malice and mockery. Princess Anqi looked in the direction of the voice and saw a man with a thick beard dressed in coarse clothes standing not far away. He was holding a baby in swaddling clothes. He was not familiar with the way he held the baby and did not care. He only held the swaddling clothes casually with one hand. Fortunately, the baby was already asleep, so he was not worried. "Shoga, who are you?" Princess Anqi stared warily at the man in front of her. He looked familiar, but when Princess Anqi thought about it seriously, she realized that she did not remember such a person. The man seemed to be stunned for a moment before he sneered, "The Queen of Nanzhao is really forgetful. We remember that the last time we met was not long ago." Chapter 1065. Me. This was a term used by the emperors of the Central Plains. Princess Anqi was stunned. She took a closer look and said hesitantly, "You are Mo Jingli?" Princess Anqi couldn't be blamed for not recognizing him. She had never seen Mo Jingli before. Besides, the man in front of her had nothing but height. He definitely looked like the arrogant and sinister King Li of Dechu State. His originally handsome face had become sallow and emaciated. His eyes were filled with ruthlessness and faintly twisted madness. There was also that strange beard that made him look like the king of a bandit stronghold. No one would doubt him if he said he was a bandit from some mountain. Mo Jingli looked at Princess Anqi and laughed loudly. "That's right. I am Mo Jingli. I didn't expect the Queen of Nanzhao to still remember me." Princess Anqi looked at the child in his hand with trepidation. Because of his crazy size, the sleeping child began to struggle. He was about to wake up. "Give me the child first," Princess Anqi said after calming herself down. "Child? Why should I listen to you?" Mo Jingli looked at Princess Anqi condescendingly. Princess Anqi said in a low voice, "Shu-er is still young. He doesn't understand adults. He will definitely cry when he wakes up. You don't want his cries to attract the people from the Prince Ding mansion, do you?" Sure enough, before Princess Anqi finished speaking, the child pouted and began to sob. He was about to burst into tears. Mo Jingli was most annoyed by these crying noises during his days on the run. He said angrily, "Shut up. How could a half-year-old baby understand his warning?" Immediately he burst into tears. Mo Jingli glared fiercely at Princess Anqi and raised his hand to throw the child away. Princess Anqi jumped in fright and hurriedly leaped up to catch the child in midair. When she landed on the ground, Princess Anqi patted the child gently, still in shock. "Shoga, be good. Don't cry. Make him shut up immediately. Otherwise, don't blame us for being impolite." Mo Jingli ordered coldly. Princess Anqi glanced sideways at Mo Jingli and didn't answer. She just coaxed the child in her arms softly. In his mother's arms, the child's cries quieted down after a short while. He slowly sobbed and fell asleep. After the baby fell asleep, Princess Anqi carefully found a flat and dry place to put the baby down. She even sprinkled some repellent around the baby. As a person from the southern wilderness, he had no lack of these things. After settling the child, Princess Anqi walked to Mo Jingli, who was standing at the entrance of the cave, and asked calmly, "Why did Emperor Chu bring I here?" Mo Jingli looked at Princess Anqi maliciously and sneered, "What do you want? Can't we catch you for no reason?" Princess Anqi shook her head and said, "I don't believe it. If it wasn't for anything, Emperor Chu could have killed I from the beginning. Why wait until now? Is it for the Prince Ding mansion?" It wasn't hard to guess. Although Mo Jingli was deposed by the Empress Dowager and the officials of Dechu State, it was because of the war with the Prince Ding Mansion. If he hadn't been defeated by the Prince Ding Mansion, the officials of Dechu State wouldn't have dared to rebel against Mo Jingli in Jiangnan. Mo Jingli stared at her and said, "You're smart. No wonder Xu Manlin couldn't beat you. Unfortunately, no matter how smart you are, it's useless in my hands. If you want to blame someone, blame yourself for coming to Li City." Princess Anqi didn't speak anymore. With her intelligence, she could see that Mo Jingli wasn't normal. If Mo Jingli was determined to kill her, it was useless to say anything. As the Queen of Nanzhao, she wouldn't kneel and beg for mercy. But Princess Anqi's calmness angered Mo Jingli. Mo Jingli stared at her and laughed sinisterly. "Do you think your husband will come to save you? Yes, he escaped, but do you think the people of the Prince Ding Mansion can find you? Even if they can find you, this child isn't even a year old yet, right? Can he hold on until then?" Princess Anqi said calmly, "What do you want?" Mo Jingli smiled and said, "Nothing. I just want to see how powerful the Prince Ding Mansion is." Princess Anqi closed her eyes and was silent for a long time. Then she said, "You captured me to distract the Prince Ding Mansion. You want to do something else. You want to harm the people of the Prince Ding Mansion." Mo Jingli tilted his head and looked at Princess Anqi for a long time. Then he sighed and said, "You're really a smart woman. You're much better than that idiot Xixia. Back then, why did I fall for that idiot?" Princess Anqi gritted her teeth, anger flashing through her eyes. When Princess Xixia was sent back to Li City by Yi Li's men, her injuries hadn't healed yet. Not to mention she looked like a 7 or 8-year-old child. Although she was very angry at her disobedient sister, Princess Anqi couldn't help but hate Mo Jingli's heartlessness when she saw how she was hurt by the man she had loved for more than 10 years. "Since you already know, then stay here obediently. Maybe if I'm in a good mood I'll let you go. If you don't, I promise I'll let you watch your precious son die a horrible death." Mo Jingli looked down at Princess Anqi and smiled coldly. As if he thought of something, a trace of hostility flashed through Mo Jingli's eyes. He smiled and said, "I know the people of the Prince Ding Mansion are looking for us. But, don't worry, they won't find us here. Even if they do, they won't dare to come unless they don't want your life anymore. By the way, if you want to escape, you can go out and try." With that, Mo Jingli ignored Princess Anqi and swaggered out of the cave. Seeing Mo Jingli's figure disappear into the cave, Princess Anqi slowly moved to the entrance of the cave. Soon she understood why Mo Jingli wasn't afraid that she would escape or that the people of the Prince Ding Mansion would find them. This cave was actually halfway up a cliff, and at the bottom of the cliff was a vast and almost endless lake. If she was alone, she could take a gamble and jump directly from the cliff, but with a child she really couldn't escape by herself. She silently looked at the lake below the cliff. She wasn't very familiar with the northwest and couldn't guess where she was. After thinking for a while, Princess Anqi turned and walked back into the cave. Chapter 1066. The news of the Queen of Nanzhao disappearing not far from Glass City was not completely concealed, and the Prince Ding Mansion did not deliberately hide it. Just as Mo Shiyao said, there was no wall in the world that did not have a crack. Right now, the people in Glass City were all nobles and even people in charge of various countries. They more or less had their own secret channels. Even if they could not find out the situation in the Prince Ding Mansion, some of the big and small matters in Glass City could not be hidden from them. Among them, the most shocked was Mo Jingyu. He originally thought that Mo Jingli was just joking when he said that he wanted to make a move on the Queen of Nanzhao. He did not expect that madman to really make a move and even succeed. Decades of cautiousness made Mo Jingyu instinctively feel that his current situation was somewhat dangerous. However, such an important piece of evidence and the temptation of the Imperial Jade Seal made him unable to retreat safely. Hearing the news reported by his subordinate, Mo Jingyu took a deep breath. After a while, he regained his senses and waved his hand to dismiss the subordinate. "Uncle Wang, did something happen?" Mo Suiyun, who was sitting at the side, asked curiously. Mo Jingyu glanced at him indifferently and said, "Didn't you hear that someone kidnapped the Queen and Prince of Nanzhao?" He blinked and said with some confusion, "Why would they kidnap the Queen and Prince of Nanzhao? This is the territory of the Prince Ding Mansion. If they have a grudge against the Queen of Nanzhao, wouldn't it be better to help people elsewhere?" Mo Jingyu looked at him and said with a smile, Your Majesty is thinking too much. Mo Suiyun lowered his head and said somewhat shyly, didn't Uncle Wang and Imperial Grandmother say, we can't provoke the Prince Ding mansion? Uncle Prince Ding seems to be very powerful. Are those assassins not afraid of him? Mo Jingyu sighed softly and murmured in a low voice, maybe he's crazy. Although his voice was low, Mo Suiyun was sitting very close to him. Naturally he heard it clearly. Mo Suiyun lowered his head and did not reply, as if he did not hear Mo Jingyu's words at all. A strange light flashed through his seemingly ignorant eyes. Even though the shadow guards of the Prince Ding mansion had searched every nook and cranny of Glass City, they still couldn't find Princess Anxi. After that, Su Qingbai and the envoys from the western region arrived at Glass City safely. Since they were escorted by the shadow guards of the Prince Ding mansion from afar, they did not encounter any trouble along the way. However, a few of the shadow guards sent by the Prince Ding mansion were injured. In the study of the Prince Ding mansion, Su Qingbai was drinking tea as he looked at Mo Xiuyao and Yi Li who were sitting at the top of the table. He asked, did something happen? Even if the emissaries from the western regions were guests, there was no need to send the shadow guard to welcome them hundreds of miles away. After a few years of being independent, Su Qingbai also became more mature and steady. Even though he was too young compared to the officials of the Prince Ding mansion, his aura was already somewhat similar to that of great teacher Su. Yi Li nodded and told him about Princess Anxi's disappearance. Su Qingbai raised his eyebrows but did not show any surprise. After thinking for a while he said, even if Mo Jingli wanted to vent his anger, he wouldn't look for the Queen of Nanzhao who has no grudge with him. With his personality, I'm afraid he'll look for the Prince Ding mansion in the end. Yi Li nodded. She naturally understood what Su Qingbai was saying. She sighed with some worry and said, I'm just afraid that Mo Jingli is deliberately trying to embarrass the Prince Ding mansion and harm Princess Anxi and the little prince. There hasn't been any news in the past 2 days, so it shouldn't be. Moreover, Mo Jingli is not someone who doesn't care about his own life. With Princess Anxi and the little prince in his hands, at least we won't attack him. Therefore, Princess Anxi shouldn't be in any danger for the time being. Su Qingbai analyzed calmly. He had no relationship with Princess Anxi. It could even be said that he didn't know her at all. Therefore he was more objective in his analysis. Leo, don't worry too much. If Mo Jingli wanted to kill her, he could have done it on the spot. Why would he bother to kidnap her and find a place to hide her? Mo Xiuyao looked at Yi Li and smiled. I also said the same thing, but Li insisted on worrying. Now that Qingbai also thinks so, you should be relieved, right? Yi Li smiled a little embarrassedly and said to Su Qingbai, fourth brother, second brother will be in charge of the accommodation and reception of the Western region ambassadors. Please take care of them. Also, I'm a little worried that Mo Jingli might do something to the Western region ambassadors. If there's any problem, you can go to Qin Feng or Zhuijing. Su Qingbai nodded solemnly. The Western region ambassadors came from afar to congratulate them. No matter what their intentions were, they were still guests from afar. Something happened to them in Glass City, it would be difficult to explain. If they weren't careful, the Western region borders might be lit again. Since we're sure it's Mo Jingli, then could he be in contact with the people from Dechu State? Su Qingbai thought for a moment, then put down the teacup in his hand and asked. Yi Li smiled faintly. Fourth brother is indeed sharp. We do suspect that Mo Jingli has met with Mo Jingyu. I'm afraid Mo Jingli has something on Mo Jingyu. So, you plan to wait for him to come? Su Qingbai raised his eyebrows. But we still have to be careful. Mo Jingli dares to sneak into Xiling and hasn't been caught by the Prince Ding mansion's shadow guards. Seems that he still has some trump cards. Mo Xiuyao nodded and said, don't worry, this king knows what else he has in his hands. Mo Jingyu has always been cautious. What could Mo Jingli have on him? Speaking of this, Su Qingbai was also curious. He had been in the Chu capital for a period of time, and had even been an official of Dechu State. Naturally, the princes of Dechu State had some understanding of these people. Mo Jingqi was able to remain safe and sound under someone as suspicious as Mo Jingli. Later, when he was under Mo Jingli, he was still able to be put in an important position. Now that Mo Jingli had fallen, he was still able to hold great power. It was clear that he wasn't someone easy to deal with. What weakness could Mo Jingli have against such a person that he could use to control him? Mo Xiuyao frowned. With Mo Jingyu's current position, no one can touch him even if they have something on him. What can make him afraid of treason, rebellion, regicide? Mo Jingqi and Mo Siyun's matter has nothing to do with him. Rebellion. Mo Jingyu isn't such an impulsive person. He doesn't have any troops in his hands. That means treason. As he spoke, Mo Shuyao's brows furrowed. Treason? Yi Li and Su Qingbai were both surprised. Mo Jingyu was a prince of Dechu state. Treason was even more surprising than rebellion and regicide. Mo Shuyao rubbed his forehead, thinking as he said, it shouldn't be considered treason. It's very likely that he sold something from Dechu state too. He frowned and thought for a moment before slowly spitting out 2 words. Northern tribes. Are you sure? Yi Li frowned. Traitors, no matter what era they were in, would always be despised by the world. If that was the case, it was no wonder that Mo Jingli was controlled by him. I'm not sure. It's just a guess, Mo Shuyao said mildly. However, whether it's true or not, we'll know soon enough. After knowing that Mo Jingli and Mo Jingyu had been in contact, the Prince Ding mansion had already sent people to investigate Mo Jingyu. Most likely, it wouldn't be long before all of Mo Jingyu's deeds would be placed before them. If even Mo Jingli could discover a secret, it was fine if the Prince Ding mansion didn't notice. If they investigated seriously, it was impossible for them not to find out. Yi Li only hoped that this wasn't true. If Mo Jingyu really did something he shouldn't have done, she was afraid that no matter what he did, he wouldn't be able to leave Glass City alive. Chapter 1067. Princess Consort Princess He Lan of the Northern Territory has arrived. A guard reported from outside the door. Hearing this, Yi Li couldn't help but smile. Yi Li had a good impression of the princess of the Northern Territory who dared to love and hate. She stood up and said to Mo Shuyao, I will go and welcome Princess He Lan. Even though Princess He Lan had the title of princess, the Northern Territory couldn't be considered a country yet. It could only be considered a tribe. As Prince Ding, Mo Shuyao naturally didn't need to personally welcome this princess, even if this princess could be the future ruler of the Northern Territory. Mo Shuyao nodded and said, that's fine. I still have some things to discuss with Qingbai. Yi Li didn't beat around the bush. She stood up and walked out. There was a brief moment of silence in the study because of Yi Li's departure. After a while, Mo Shuyao finally said, Qingbai, what do you have to say? Su Qingbai nodded slightly and said, I heard. The officials of Li City have some complaints about Li Er? Mo Shuyao couldn't help but smile. Fourth young Master Su, it's not like you haven't dealt with those old scholars before. How can you not understand? Su Qingbai lowered his eyes and nodded. That is indeed the case. Then what does Prince think? Mo Shuyao smiled with satisfaction. This matter will have to depend on fourth young Master Su. I understand. Su Qingbai nodded. The smile on Mo Shuyao's face became even more joyful. It was so comfortable to talk to smart people. Fourth young Master Su looked like he was skilled in politics and was cultured and refined. In reality, he was a person who would seek revenge for the smallest grievance. If it wasn't for the absolute power in his personality with Su Qingbai's scholarly appearance, how could he have subdued the great families of Xiling in a short 2 to 3 years? Although Su Qingchen was the leader of the 5 young masters of the Su family, Mo Shuyao knew that eldest young Master Su was too aloof. It would be difficult for him to stay in the government for long. Therefore, if she really wanted to do something, she would have to turn to the 4th son of the Su family. As for how those annoying old fellows would be tormented by 4th young Master Su, His Highness Prince Ding didn't care. It would be a big mistake to think that Prince Ding was punishing him for his petty actions. The name Prince Ding could also mean petty, vengeful, and vindictive. Helan. Outside the entrance of the Prince Ding mansion, Yi Li smiled as she looked at the beautiful lady in red who was dressed in the Northern Tribe's unique uniform. Princess Ding. Princess Helan rushed forward with a bright smile and gave Yi Li a warm hug. Princess Ding, long time no see. You're still so beautiful. Yi Li helplessly returned the hug and said with a smile, I'm not as beautiful as the princess. After staying in this era for so long, Yi Li realized that she was not used to such a warm greeting. Really? Princess Helan looked at Yi Li with joy. Many people praised her beauty, but what kind of praise was more pleasing than praise from the beauty in one's eyes? Yi Li smiled and said, of course it's true. It seems that the princess has had a great time in the past year. Princess Helan smiled and said, not bad. Although the Central Plains is great, I still prefer the North. I've heard that you've had a wonderful year. One day I really want to compete with you in martial arts. Along the way, the people of the Central Plains have been talking about Princess Ding as if she's a living goddess of war. You're most welcome. Yi Li smiled and said, the princess has had a great journey. Please come in and rest. Please come in. Princess Helan did not stand on ceremony. She took Yi Li's hand and walked into the Prince Ding mansion. When they reached the entrance, Yi Li suddenly stopped and looked at a certain place outside the mansion. Princess Helan was puzzled and asked, "What's wrong?" Yi Li smiled faintly and said, "Nothing, please." At an inconspicuous place, she raised her hand and gestured to Qin Feng. She clearly felt that someone was staring at her from that direction. Qin Feng nodded slightly and watched the two of them enter the Prince Ding mansion. Then he waved his hand and ordered the guards to search in the direction Yi Li pointed. In the prince's mansion, Princess Helan held Yi Li's hand and walked inside. She whispered, "Princess Ding, is there something going against the Prince Ding mansion?" Yi Li raised her eyebrows in surprise. She didn't expect Princess Helan's senses to be so sharp. Princess Helan quickly shook her head and said, "No, we encountered a group of assassins on the way here. It was before we entered Feihong Pass. At first I thought it was the remnants of Ren Qining's subordinates who wanted to take revenge on me. Later I felt that it wasn't so. As soon as we arrived at Glass City, I heard that assassins kidnapped the Queen of Nanzhao. No. Princess Helan didn't find anything just now. She just guessed that Yi Li might have found something from Yi Li's reaction. Thinking of this, Princess Helan dejectedly admitted that she was indeed inferior to Princess Ding. Yi Li let out a soft sigh and briefly explained the situation to him. Princess Helan didn't care. She smiled and said, "This Emo Jingli is quite bold. If there is a chance, this princess would like to meet him." Yi Li shook her head helplessly and said with a smile, "I don't want you to meet him." Emo Jingli was able to set up an ambush to assassinate Princess Helan on the way here. It could be seen that he was really crazy. He didn't care that he might become the target of the various countries. In Glass City, in a dark alley, a middle-aged man wearing plain cotton clothes slowly raised his head. His eyes flashed with a sharp light. As expected of Yi Li, she was almost discovered. Thinking of the gentlewoman in white with a sweet smile outside the Prince Ding mansion, a complicated expression flashed across the middle-aged man's face. After a moment he seemed to have thought of something. His face became sinister and twisted. "Yi Li Emoshuyao. I won't let you off. I won't let you off." In the Dechu State's messenger's hostel, Emo Jingyu pushed open the door to his room with a gloomy face. Just now he heard that Princess Helan's group in the north had encountered an assassination attempt. He didn't need to think to know who did it. Now that the Prince Ding mansion was at its peak, there was no one who dared to go against the Prince Ding mansion other than that crazy Emo Jingli. As soon as he entered, he realized that something was wrong. Emo Jingyu raised his head in alarm and saw a person sitting on the soft couch in his room reading a book. Emo Jingyu was stunned. He quickly turned around and closed the door. In a low voice he roared, "You're crazy. You actually dare to swagger in here at a time like this." Emo Jingli sneered. He raised his eyebrows in disdain. "Are you afraid? Don't worry, the people from the Prince Ding mansion won't discover me." Emo Jingyu looked carefully and realized that most of Emo Jingli's appearance was very different from last time. His originally eye-catching beard had been completely replaced, and his originally sallow and thin face was also a little too fair. He was even wearing the clothes of a guard from the Dechu State's Prince Yu's residence. He didn't look like a middle-aged man in his 30s. Instead he looked like a sickly young man in his 20s. Emo Jingyu walked up and stared at Emo Jingli. When he got closer he realized that Emo Jingli's face was unnaturally white. It turned out that he had applied a layer of powder. Emo Jingli hadn't been living well these days. It wasn't possible for him to return to his original pampered appearance in a short period of time. Naturally he could only use powder to cover it up. But as a man, even though Emo Jingyu was a member of the imperial family and liked to pretend to be cultured, he still couldn't stand the powder on his face. He couldn't help but frown. "You're really unscrupulous." If one wasn't familiar with Emo Jingli, they might not be able to recognize him even if he stood in front of them. No wonder Emo Jingli was so fearless. Chapter 1068. Emo Jingli's face twisted for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. Why are you looking for me? Emojingyu asked. It was not a good feeling to have your weakness in someone else's hands, so Emojingyu did not want to see Emojingli at all. Emojingli smiled. Of course there's something. In 2 days it will be the Prince Ding Mansion's banquet. The thing I want you to do for me is also on that day. Emojingyu raised his eyebrows, waiting for him to speak. Emojingli said, I want you to bring that Mo Yuchen from the Prince Ding Mansion out on that day. Emojingyu looked at him indifferently. Do you think I have the ability to bring the heir of the Prince Ding Mansion out of the heavily guarded Prince Ding Mansion? Moreover, even if I bring him out, how can I get away afterwards? That's your problem. Emojingli said indifferently. Methods are always thought of by people. As long as you want to, there will naturally be a way. Emojingyu flatly refused. I have no way. Emojingli was silent for a moment, then said in a low voice, No way? Then let me remind you. If you have no way, perhaps the little emperor you brought with you has a way. Emojingyu's expression changed slightly. You want to use his majesty? Indeed, Mo Suiyun was only 11 or 12 years old. They were all children, so it was not easy for him to arouse suspicion. Emojingli sneered. His majesty? You sure know how to say it. Don't tell me you're worried about him. Anyway, he's Emojingchi's son. Even if he dies, it has nothing to do with you. Isn't that right? Emojingyu was silent for a long time, then said, I know. But, you'd better make sure you really have the ability. If you fail halfway, the Shadow Guard and Qi Lin of the Prince Ding Mansion are not to be trifled with. Emojingli smiled. Don't worry. When that day comes, they'll be busy. Also, there's one more thing. Emojingli, don't push your luck. Emojingyu growled angrily. Looking at his angry appearance, Emojingli laughed happily and said leisurely, Don't worry, this matter is even easier. On the day of the banquet at the Prince Ding Mansion, I want to go to the Prince Ding Mansion with you. You're crazy. Emojingyu gritted her teeth. Emojingli glanced at him indifferently and did not refute. Emojingli took a deep breath and said in a rough voice, I know, but what you have? Emojingli nodded and said, Don't worry. As long as I see Mo Yuchen, I will give you everything you want. You better keep your word. Emojingyu said hatefully. Ka. A muffled sound came from outside the door. Emojingli's expression changed as he rushed out. Who is it? The door was opened and a bright yellow voice hurriedly turned into the corridor. Emojingli sneered and rushed forward to bring the person back. Seeing Mo Suiyun thrown into the room, Emojingyu's expression turned ugly. Looking at Emojingli, she asked, What should we do? Emojingli snorted. What do you mean, what should we do? Since he heard it, we'll just kill him. Mo Suiyun sat on the ground with a pale face, looking at the two people in front of him in horror. He accidentally saw someone enter Emojingyu's room, so he quietly came over to see who it was. He happened to see Emojingyu come back, but did not expect to hear their secret plan. He accidentally bumped into the wall and was discovered by Emojingli. Uncle Yu. Mo Suiyun looked at Emojingyu in horror. Emojingyu frowned and said, If His Majesty suddenly dies, it will arouse the suspicion of the Prince Ding Mansion. At that time, Emojingli thought for a while and also praised Emojingyu's words. The Prince Ding Mansion must be heavily protected by Mo Xiaobao now. It would not be easy to trick him out. At least among the people from Dechu State, Mo Suiyun had the highest chance. But I won't say anything, Uncle Li. Although Emojingli had changed a lot, Mo Suiyun still recognized Emojingli. The fear on his face deepened. Regardless of whether it was the princess or the prince, none of the people left behind by Emojingchi were not afraid of him. Emojingli narrowed his eyes and stared at Mo Suiyun for a while. He said indifferently, If you don't want to die, be obedient. Mo Suiyun nodded repeatedly and wiped his tears. I'll be obedient. Uncle Li, don't kill me. Looking at his frightened appearance, Emojingli nodded with satisfaction and reached out to pull him up. Mo Suiyun stood up fearfully and felt uneasy under Emojingli's blade-like gaze. Emojingli looked at him and asked, Do you know what you have to do? Mo Suiyun hesitated for a moment and finally nodded. Can you do it? Emojingli asked. Yes. Mo Suiyun nodded quickly and said, Mo Yuchen asked me to find him to play. I didn't go these days. I'll find him to play later. He will definitely come with me. Emojingli's lips curved into a cold smile. He raised his hand and patted Mo Suiyun's head, saying, "Very good, Uncle Lee knows you are a good boy. As long as you bring Mo Yuchen out of the Prince Ding mansion on the day of the Prince Ding mansion banquet, you will still be the emperor of Dechu state. Uncle Lee won't hurt you." Mo Suiyun couldn't help shivering and whispered, "Uncle Lee, I know that you're tuning in to the Biao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.